Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip into a time when sleeplessness wasn't something solved by blue light filters or a podcast voiced by someone named Chad. It was a mysterious ailment of the upper class. Imagine it. Moonlight spilling through a lace-curtained window, the slow creak of a wooden floorboard, and you, wrapped in layers of flannel, wide awake at 2 a.m. in a Victorian-era bed that's more decorative than restful. You're not alone. Across the drawing rooms and parlours of 19th century England, women toss and turn, haunted not by caffeine, but by a deeper, strangely glamorous brand of nighttime unrest. Now, you probably won't survive this if you're expecting action sequences or sword fights, but if you're here for 2 hours of historical lettuce and light sarcasm, you've made the right choice. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual, post your location and local time below. I love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly across creaking parquet floors, the kind that protest every toe's touch with a half-hearted groan. The gaslights flicker, and the only thing louder than your footsteps is the sound of your thoughts, which, in true Victorian fashion, have been trained to spiral the moment your head hits a pillow. The house is quiet now. Even the servants, so often clattering around like extras in a Dickens novel, have gone to bed. But you lie on a stiff mattress stuffed with horsehair, your fingers knotting nervously in the hem of your nightgown. Your eyes trace the dim shadows cast by the flickering hearth, dancing like spectres on the ceiling. You're not resting, you're enduring the night, and you're not alone. Victorian women, particularly those in the middle and upper classes, were in a chronic relationship with insomnia. Their diaries, letters, and novels are littered with lamentations about sleeplessness, night waking, and the terrifying stillness between midnight and dawn. But this isn't just a health issue, it's practically a lifestyle. We're talking about a time when being delicate was on trend, when ailments weren't embarrassing but fashion-forward. To suffer from insomnia wasn't necessarily seen as a defect. It was a whispered badge of refinement, a subtle way of declaring you were sensitive, overworked by all that embroidery and emotional labour. If you didn't sleep, it might be because your imagination was too active, or because your husband was too boring, or both. Drawing rooms became the epicenter of after-dark storytelling. Tea wasn't just a morning affair, it stretched long into the evening hours. Women gathered by flickering candlelight, passing around thin china cups, whispering about their racing hearts and tired minds. And no one batted an eye if you mentioned you hadn't slept a wink in 3 nights. If anything, you earned an extra scone. Insomnia, you see, was often tied to moral or emotional concerns. Maybe you'd read too many novels by gaslight. Maybe your corset had compressed your lungs to the size of a walnut. Or maybe, as one widely distributed advice column hinted, your spleen was simply irritated by social overexposure. Historians still argue whether this culture of elegant sleeplessness arose organically, or was carefully constructed by a society desperate to keep women indoors and docile. After all, a woman too tired to think straight probably isn't marching for suffrage. Or, asking difficult questions like, what's in this tonic? But in the moment, it all feels so achingly polite. You sip herbal teas prepared with the care of a potion, chew fennel seeds delicately, and talk about how the moon keeps you awake. You perform your restlessness the way some perform dinner conversation, with a fan in one hand and a tragic novel in the other. There's also something deeply performative about the Victorian night. You might take an hour-long walk before bed, not for the health benefits, but for the opportunity to be seen wistfully strolling by lamplight. You're expected to look tired, but beautiful, sleepy, but composed. A real-life pre-Raphaelite painting with under-eye circles. By now, you've gone back to bed. The sheets are freshly pressed, the bedpost polished, but still, your mind races. You think about your niece's piano recital, the odd tone in your husband's voice, the neighbour's scandalous garden statue. Everything, anything, becomes fuel for your midnight thoughts. You try counting sheep. The sheep look smug. This is where the rituals begin. You reach for your nightstand, where a small tray sits with a pot of milk, a silver spoon, and a folded linen napkin. Some women add nutmeg or lavender. Others, if they're feeling bold, mix in a few drops of soothing tincture, often packed with alcohol or mild narcotics. It's not quite NyQuil, but it'll do. Still awake, you prop yourself up on pillows embroidered with biblical verses. The irony doesn't escape you. You consider reading, something dry like sermons. But then again, the doctor did say reading too much might overstimulate the brain. So instead, you stare at the ceiling and try to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the... what was it? Right. Out through the mouth. Meanwhile, your husband snores beside you, blissfully unaware that you've spent the last hour contemplating whether your insomnia is caused by your blood, your uterus, or your recent visit to the seaside. Because that's another theory. Travel. Too much fresh air, or the wrong kind of sea breeze, can apparently upset your entire nervous system. It's now past 3. The clock on the mantel chimes softly, as if even it is trying not to wake the house. You feel your body slowly resign to the idea that rest isn't coming easily tonight. That's okay. You're used to this. Across town in other gaslit homes, other women lie awake with similar thoughts. Some will write in their diaries. Some will pace their corridors. Some will reach for one of the dozen remedies they've tucked in secret drawers. But nearly all will consider the next day's schedule with dread. It's not just the lack of sleep. It's the knowledge that no one will question your exhaustion. They'll merely nod and say, yes, the air has been most unsettling lately. And maybe it has. Or maybe you and thousands like you are just part of a cultural moment that turned sleeplessness into a social ritual, a nightly waltz with shadows, performed in silence, beneath the flickering light of the past. You shuffle down the hallway in slippers that were never built for speed. Your candle throws just enough light to catch the brocade wallpaper, and maybe the scuttling blur of a mouse who's also apparently got insomnia. The night has weight to it. Not darkness exactly. Just a heavy kind of hush that settles over everything once the clocks finish their chiming and the hearths burn low. The truth is, you've been tired for days. But sleep? That's another matter entirely. You're living in a body corseted into obedience, under a regime of etiquette manuals and polite expectations. Even your yawns have rules. During the Victorian era, women's health concerns were largely brushed off, folded neatly under the catch-all banner of nervous disorders. Insomnia was just one brushstroke in a larger gendered painting of discomfort, misdiagnosed by doctors who believed that the womb had its own gravitational pull toward madness. You try not to think about that as you lie back in bed, spine straight, hands folded like a heroine waiting for the novel to resume. Victorian women were chronically overstimulated in the least stimulating way possible. Life was a daily choreography of social engagements, emotional labour, and the constant physical strain of their fashion. Corsets squeezing the ribs, layers of fabric trapping body heat, and boots that whispered, these were not made for walking. You might have spent the afternoon attending a garden party that was supposed to relax you, but small talk is exhausting, and peering through a parasol doesn't really ease the mental load. So instead, your evening begins with a feeling of a heavy brain spinning with everything you said or didn't say. And remember, in this world, anxiety isn't a recognised medical diagnosis. It's just the price you pay for being a sensitive creature. The term du jour, neurasthenia. A beautifully vague condition blamed for everything from fatigue and indigestion to an alarming inability to enjoy embroidery. Historians still argue whether this diagnosis was more of a social excuse or a real cluster of undiagnosed mental illnesses. Either way, it made one thing clear. You, madam, were simply not strong enough for modern life. Imagine hearing that after being the emotional airbag for your entire household. You sit up again, because lying flat feels too vulnerable. Your fingers reach for a velvet-bound notebook. Maybe journaling will help, you think. That's what the ladies' magazine said. A simple expression of one's feelings before bedtime may ease the soul towards slumber. You try. You write. Today I smiled through an entire luncheon with the vicar's wife. She asked if I'd tried German chamomile. You pause. Cross it out. Write instead. I feel like my skin doesn't fit me. Then tear out the page and tuck it under your pillow like a forbidden thought. Society tells you that sleeplessness is a result of moral failing or poor spiritual hygiene. You're either too idle or too sinful. Some recommend repentance. Others suggest fresh air and light Bible study. None recommend dismantling the patriarchy. In cities, gas lamps cast their glow across cobbled streets until midnight. In smaller towns, the darkness is absolute. Either way, the silence is misleading. The Victorian world is noisy in all the wrong ways. Coal trains grinding through the outskirts, rats in the walls, the scratchy, low whine of your husband's breathing. Even in bed, you're never truly alone. That mental list of grievances, fears, and unfinished to-dos is back. Did I scald the milk pot? Did I offend Lady Rawlings when I refused the third eclair? Is this headache from the weather, or from suppressing righteous rage all afternoon? You're not wrong. The medical profession at this point is flailing wildly. Some physicians still believe in the wandering womb theory, in which your uterus is essentially a bored ghost that gets lost and causes trouble. Your insomnia, likely caused by this misbehaving organ, apparently knocking around your spleen like a drunk cricket ball. Of course, this doesn't apply to men. Men get to be fatigued or weary from their labours. You get to be nervous. A condition treated with anything from enforced bed rest to emotional condescension. And sometimes, if you're lucky, a walk in the garden. By now you've given up on sleep. You reach for a worn robe, fasten it with shaking fingers, and tiptoe down the stairs. The kitchen is dark, but the stove still radiates a faint warmth. You pour yourself a glass of tepid water from the ceramic jug and sit at the long table, pretending for a moment that you live alone and are allowed to simply exist. You stare at the clock. The tick is almost hypnotic. It's the only rhythm that matches your pulse. The Victorians, for all their rigid values, were obsessed with solving the problem of sleeplessness. Books, advertisements, and home journals all offered solutions, some laughably elaborate, some bizarrely mundane. There were whole publications devoted to nights of restless discontent. They recommended everything from placing a copper coin under your pillow to singing lullabies in Latin. One fringe remedy involved swallowing small beads of wax, which supposedly slid down your throat and lulled the nervous system into peace. Another popular choice? Rubbing the soles of your feet with onions. And no, we're not there yet, but it's coming. Still, amid the more theatrical nonsense, there were the quiet, heartbreaking rituals women invented for themselves. A favourite brooch tucked beneath the pillow. A letter to a dead friend reread for the 100th time. Counting backwards from 100 in French. You whisper the numbers now. Cent. 99. 98. You get to 82 and forget what comes next. You sigh. Some women went the spiritual route. There were prayer cards, miniature rosaries, and entire midnight recitations of psalms. Others leaned into the new age of pseudoscience, with magnets under the bed or vibrational crystals pressed against their temples. Historians still debate whether the explosion of odd insomnia cures was driven by desperation or by the emerging consumer culture eager to monetize women's discomfort. Either way, you start to notice how many products are quietly marketed with the phrase, "for the sleepless wife." You stand, stretch, and drift back to your room. The hallway's colder now. A draft curls through the banister and brushes your cheek like a cold hand. You don't flinch. You've gotten used to ghosts, real and metaphorical. Back under the covers, you shut your eyes and pretend. Pretend you are deeply asleep. That your mind isn't shouting under the surface. That you're not waltzing again with that familiar fluttering dread. You hear the early birds begin their tentative sleepy chirping. The sky isn't blue yet, but it's lost its depthless black. Soon the house will stir. The day will begin. And you, dear insomniac, will meet it with the hollowed-out calm of a woman who didn't sleep again, but survived the night in silence. Because for Victorian women, sleep wasn't just a health issue. It was a stage, a performance, a slow dance in the dark with a partner named Anxiety, and you've just finished another set. It's the morning after your 6th consecutive night of poor sleep, though you're not keeping official count anymore. You're far too tired for math, and besides, time has started to feel like a warm pudding, vague, soft, and vaguely jiggly around the edges. The lace curtain flutters slightly, stirred by a breeze too weak to be useful. Pale sunlight spills across your coverlet, picking out the embroidery like it's trying to flatter your domestic sensibilities. Your body remains supine, eyes open, mind buzzing with that dull, crackly hum that comes after too many nights of near rest. You're awake, but you're not really here. Still, you rise, because that's what you do. Because in the Victorian era, a woman's worth is tied more to her ability to maintain appearances than her ability to maintain consciousness. You brush your hair until it shines like a promise. You pinch your cheeks to manufacture health. And you head down to breakfast in a dressing gown that hides just how frayed you're becoming. Across the table, your husband, alert, smugly refreshed, and enthusiastically buttering toast, asks whether you slept well. You lie. Well enough. You always lie. Because I stared at the ceiling for 5 hours before crying softly into a pillow that smells like stale lavender, is not polite breakfast conversation. It also implies emotional instability, which could get you labelled neurasthenic, or worse, hysterical. Ah yes, the charming historical term neurasthenia, a diagnosis so vague it could mean anything from melancholy to indigestion to the simple fact of being a woman with opinions. Historians still debate whether it was a legitimate medical condition or a tidy label slapped onto women who dared to wilt under impossible societal expectations. So when your head aches, your muscles tremble from fatigue, and your eyes sting with sleep that never came, you simply butter your toast and carry on, because it's 1870-something, and Victorian society has a special talent for minimising female suffering by dressing it in lace and calling it delicacy. But privately, quietly, you're desperate, and that's where the lettuce comes in. Yes, you heard that right. Not opium, not laudanum, not the more scandalous herbal tinctures whispered about in certain circles. No, your latest sleep experiment involves a leafy green best known for its starring role in salads, lettuce. To the modern ear it sounds laughable, but back then, lettuce water was a perfectly respectable, if slightly soggy, insomnia cure. You first read about it in the Lady's Domestic Companion and Health Manual, sandwiched between advice on preventing melancholy with embroidery and a recipe for boiled calf's foot jelly. According to the article, the milky sap within lettuce leaves, known as lactucarium, possesses soothing properties most beneficial to the disturbed lady's constitution. In other words, drink boiled lettuce, and maybe you'll finally sleep like the angel your husband thinks you are. Last night you tried it. You crept into the scullery after everyone else had gone to bed, lit a small oil lamp, and set about preparing your potion like a sorceress of the salad realm. The recipe was simple enough. Take a head of romaine, cos lettuce if available, slice roughly and boil gently in water for 20 minutes. Strain. Drink warm. It looked harmless, smelled faintly vegetal, tasted unforgivably green. Like grass clippings that eloped with a bitter cucumber and settled in your mouth to die. Still, you drank the full cup. You even added a single clove, hoping to disguise the flavour, though that mostly just made it taste confused. Then you climbed into bed, curled up, and waited. And you know what? It helped. Not much. Not like laudanum. But something about the quiet act of preparing it. The steam rising in that quiet kitchen. The sense that you were doing something to care for yourself. It softened the night a little. Did you sleep? Maybe 2 hours, maybe 3. But they were deeper than usual, and free from that heavy awareness of lying awake while everyone else in the house dreams of fox hunts or French pastry. So this morning, even with your under eyes screaming for a cucumber you don't have, you feel hopeful. Lettuce water is hardly a new invention. The ancient Greeks were doing it long before Queen Victoria ever picked up a teaspoon. Hippocrates recommended lettuce for inducing sleep. Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder described its calming effects. In medieval herbal guides, lettuce is listed as a cooling herb, ideal for temperaments overburdened by heat and excess choler. In Victorian England, where herbalism overlapped awkwardly with emerging medical science, lettuce water fit the bill. It was natural, non-threatening, and entirely inoffensive to the social order. Unlike morphine, it wouldn't cause addiction. Unlike mesmerism, it didn't require lying in a trance while a man in a waistcoat waved his fingers over your body. Best of all, it felt respectable. Women could prepare it without embarrassment. Mothers could offer it to their daughters. Even fashionable ladies might sip it from bone china teacups, pinkies raised, pretending it was just another after-dinner tisane. And so it became a fixture in the quiet nighttime rituals of the restless elite. Historians still argue whether its popularity was driven by pharmacological belief or by the sheer emotional comfort of doing something. But either way, for the Victorian woman lying sleepless under her lace canopy, it became a small sacred routine. Some women swore by adding other herbs: chamomile, lavender, fennel seed. Others added a touch of honey or a squeeze of lemon. A few left the lettuce leaves to steep overnight in cool water, creating a sort of moonlit tonic they sipped by candlelight, wrapped in shawls and secret grief. Your own recipe is still evolving. Last night's clove wasn't a success, but tonight you're considering rose petals, or maybe a single cinnamon stick, just to rebel slightly. There's even a half-remembered story from your grandmother, who claimed that her neighbour in Bath once drank nothing but lettuce water for a week, emerged spiritually cleansed, and married a retired colonel. You suspect it had more to do with the colonel's pension than the lettuce, but still, the idea lingers. The Victorians, for all their constraints, were quietly inventive when it came to self-soothing. In an age where women were told to endure rather than express, rituals like these became lifelines. You couldn't scream into a pillow, but you could steep a leaf. You couldn't call it burnout, but you could call it frayed nerves. And when someone asked how you slept, you could smile and say, "I took a little lettuce tea last night, and it helped a touch." And they would nod approvingly, as if you'd passed some private test of composure. Tonight you'll make it again, not because you believe it will knock you out like a dram of poppy syrup, but because it helps you feel in control. You'll boil the leaves slowly, watching the water turn a pale yellowish green. You'll inhale the steam. You'll sip in silence, wrapped in your shawl, and think about how odd it is that boiled salad has become your best shot at peace. It's ridiculous. It's gentle. It's entirely Victorian. And in a way, it's working. You carry the empty teacup back down to the scullery, careful not to wake the housemaid or make your footsteps echo on the cold stone. You rinse it slowly, as though extending the ritual might coax just a bit more calm into your bones. Steam still clings to the rim like a ghost of sleep. And somewhere outside, a milk cart rattles down the lane. Too early for deliveries, too late for dreams. You're exhausted again. But this time, your body feels different. Not exactly rested, never that, but quieter. Like the storm inside you has downgraded from a howling tempest to a persistent drizzle. That's good enough. In fact, for a Victorian woman with chronic insomnia, that's practically a miracle. Still, you know that lettuce water can only take you so far, and what happens when even that fails? What happens when the boiled leaves stop working, and the whispery rituals lose their charm? Well then, you go to war. Not loudly, of course, not with swords or speeches. You go to war the way Victorian women did everything, quietly, cleverly, and disguised in ribbons. This is a war waged in the margins of cookbooks, in the hidden drawers of bedside tables, encoded letters between friends. A war fought with dried herbs, copper pots, and strategic yawning at social events to excuse yourself early. You start keeping a diary, not for posterity, but as an act of defiance. In it, you record your sleep experiments. Boiled lettuce, 9:20 p.m. Result, 3 HRs, sleep, shallow. Added nutmeg tonight. Tasted vile. Slept poorly. You track moon phases, barometric pressure, dinner menus. You note whether you felt jangled or unquiet or merely absently tired. It becomes your science. You are the lone researcher in a personal laboratory of exhaustion, and you are not alone. Other women are doing the same. Across London and Manchester and the farther reaches of Shropshire, women like you are building quiet empires of trial and error medicine. Some consult herbal guides, others trade recipes at sewing circles. One cousin swears by red clover syrup. A neighbour has taken to sleeping with dried hops sewn into a pouch beneath her pillow, reminiscent of beer, she admits with a grin. Historians still debate how much of this grassroots remedy culture stemmed from necessity and how much was born of rebellion. Because make no mistake, choosing your own sleep cure in a world ruled by male physicians was an act of rebellion. The medical establishment, after all, had little to offer beyond vague diagnoses and chilling prescriptions. A typical doctor might advise you to take air, avoid mental exertion, or cease reading novels, as if sleeplessness were the result of too much Jane Austen, and not, say, the grinding pressure of being expected to raise 7 children, host dignified dinner parties, and maintain a 19-inch waist. And if you pressed further, if your insomnia became chronic, if your under-eye circles threatened the family portrait, they might prescribe something stronger: laudanum, chloral hydrate, a concoction involving camphor and God knows what. But those came with risks, side effects, and social shame. Doses for women, they'd say, handing you a vial like a child's toy that could also kill you. So women turned to their own cabinets, their own gardens, their own imaginations. They consulted the family herbal and Mrs. Beeton's household management. They learned to dry valerian root, to steep skullcap, to tie lavender bundles under their pillows, and hope the scent was strong enough to drown out the noise of their own thoughts. You try lavender too, it's pleasant. The smell reminds you of your grandmother's wardrobe, cedar, dust, and faint echoes of laughter. But it doesn't help much with sleep, so you move on. Your diary becomes more detailed. Bed at 10:15, 1 cup lettuce water, 2 drops valerian tincture, sleep achieved by 11:30, woke at 2:40, vivid dream of butter churning. You wonder if you're becoming a little mad. Then you remember, in Victorian society, sleep loss itself was practically synonymous with madness. The only way to remain sane was to keep trying. And so the experiments continue. You soak your feet in warm salt water before bed. You switch to thinner bed covers. Maybe you're overheating. You try placing your head at the foot of the bed, convinced that your body simply dislikes orientation. You even try not trying, lying still with your eyes open for hours, attempting to invite sleep without chasing it. That one's the worst. Your friends begin to notice the shadows under your eyes. Not your husband, naturally. He's too busy discussing canal investments and misplacing his cravat. But your friends. Elizabeth says you look fragile. Margaret suggests cod liver oil. Louisa, never one for subtlety, simply asks if your marriage is unhappy. You laugh it off. You say, just tired, that's all. But Louisa arches an eyebrow and says, tired is a state. You look like a ghost in a corset. She's not wrong. You do. The truth is, you're starting to dream while awake. Not full hallucinations, just flashes. Movement where there is none. Whispers in the hallway that vanish when you turn your head. You drop a sugar spoon yesterday and nearly cried. Not from fear, just from the noise. The sheer surprise of it. Victorian insomnia wasn't always treated with the gravity it deserved, but its effects could be devastating. Women were often dismissed as nervous or melancholic. when in truth they were falling apart from sheer mental and physical fatigue. Imagine running a household with no sleep, hosting social obligations, enduring corsetry, keeping children alive and lace collars starch white, and doing it all with a smile that says, "Yes, I slept wonderfully, thank you." And underneath it all, you know what's really at stake: reputation. A woman who complains too much risks gossip. A woman who stops functioning risks removal, to a rest home perhaps, or to her sister's care in Devon. In extreme cases, a sanatorium. And no one wants that. Those places smell of ammonia and whispered regrets. So you take your lettuce water, you stir it with hope and drink it with ritual, but you also start sneaking out, just once a week. Not far, just down the lane to visit Clara, your old friend from the Ladies' Literary Society. Clara is bolder than you. She reads German novels. She once smoked a cheroot at a garden party. And most importantly, she has a cousin who studied botany at Cambridge. Clara's remedies are experimental. She offers you sleep vinegar, a mix of apple cider, rosemary, and something she calls poppy shadow, which you suspect is technically illegal. You don't ask, you just sip. One night, Clara shows you a box she's hidden beneath the floorboards of her sewing room. Inside, dried herbs, cloth sachets, small glass bottles labelled in neat copper plate script, lemon balm, hops, passion flower, mugwort, angelica. She's built her own apothecary, and she offers it to you. You take a tiny satchel of dried hops home and tuck it beneath your pillow. It smells strange, like old beer and hay, but you sleep 5 hours straight. For the first time in months, you wake up weeping with gratitude. It's not a cure, it never is, but it's a beginning. You're not just enduring anymore, you're adapting, learning, choosing. That's power, even if it's laced with fatigue. And you're not alone. Across parlours and drawing rooms, across diaries and herbal journals, Victorian women are reclaiming their nights. Not with violence, not with protest signs, but with teacups and tinctures and quietly rebellious hope. Sleep may be elusive, but so are you. And in this delicate battle between lace and lunacy, between exhaustion and dignity, you are learning how to survive. One boiled lettuce leaf at a time. You wake with a start, still dressed in your nightgown, one slipper dangling from your foot and the other somewhere underneath the ottoman. The room is quiet, but your heart is pounding like you've just outrun the constable. Outside, the gas lamps flicker their ghostly orange halos across the window pane, as if the city itself is uncertain whether it's night or day. You've been asleep, but it didn't feel like rest. More like your brain threw a sheet over its furniture and tried to impersonate a proper dream. Everything was warped. Horses with bird heads, a silent parade of men in top hats walking into the sea, your mother scolding you in fluent Latin. It was nonsense, but it was sleep adjacent, and you'll take it. You reach under your pillow for the little hop sachet Clara gave you, now crumpled and sweetly sour smelling. It may be working, or maybe you're finally so tired your body's giving up on insomnia out of sheer protest. Either way, it's a victory, a small one. Yeah, but Victorian women learn early that you must collect small victories like pressed flowers, fragile, faded, and hidden inside books no one reads. Today, you're determined to feel better, maybe even productive. You dress in a smart walking gown, gloves with only minimal fraying at the fingertips, and your sensible hat, not the large swirly one with peacock feathers. That's for Sundays and theatrical moments. Today is a Tuesday kind of day, and you have business. Specifically, the business of apothecaries. Clara has whispered of a particular one, tucked behind the butcher's on Mill Street. No sign above the door, only a string of bells and the unmistakable smell of fennel and risk. Officially, it's just a supplier of spices and medicinal powders. Unofficially, it's where the city's sleepless elite go when lettuce water simply won't do. You arrive mid-morning and knock, hesitating only slightly. A man with a bow tie and a surprising number of eyebrow hairs ushers you in. His name is Mr. Aldwych, and he looks like someone who hasn't slept properly since the Crimean War. Promising. You step into the shop and it's like entering an alchemist's library. Shelves groan with glass jars labelled in Latin and English. Papaver somniferum, Melissa officinalis, Humulus lupulus, Lactica virosa. The air smells of earth and tin and faintly burnt sugar. It is, in short, delightful. You confess your problem, carefully choosing your words. You say you're restless and suffer from a constitution made delicate by domestic strain. Mr. Aldrich nods sympathetically, as if you've just described an ailment more universal than measles. He gestures toward a tray of amber vials. Most of my ladies start with tincture of passion flower, he murmurs, then move on to valerian root. If those fail, we might consider sleep thistle or blue vervain. Or, if you prefer to be unconscious for 11 to 13 hours, chloral hydrate in syrup form. But that's only for special cases and severely disappointing husbands. You blink. Did the apothecary just make a joke? Yes, he says, reading your mind. We try not to take ourselves too seriously here. Sleep is too fragile for that. You leave with a small brown package containing a blend of dried passion flower, hops, and skullcap. He warns you it's bitter, so you buy a bit of licorice root to soften the taste. At home, you place the packet next to your now shrinking head of lettuce, and suddenly your nightstand looks less like a bedroom and more like a hedge witch's pantry. That night, you brew the herbs into a strong tea. It smells floral and slightly musty, like a forgotten garden bench. You sip it slowly, sitting in your window seat with a shawl across your lap, and the vague feeling that you're becoming someone entirely new, or perhaps very old. Someone who trusts plants more than people, a respectable forest witch, and once again, you sleep. Not soundly, not luxuriously, but solidly. You wake only once, and when you do, you return to sleep without the usual philosophical spiral into mortality, economic doom, or whether your cutlery drawer is properly arranged by decade. You begin to hope. Victorian women weren't strangers to this sort of quiet hope, nor were they strangers to frustration when remedies failed to perform as promised. Many turned to domestic medicine guides, popular at the time, that walked the line between science and storytelling. These thick, weighty books sat proudly on shelves next to volumes of poetry and sermons, their gilded titles declaring a mother's guide to restorative remedies or the domestic healer's companion. One of the most well-known volumes, published in the 1860s, claimed that onion poultices, applied with firm moral intention, could cure nervous agitation, and that a small saucer of warm milk under one's bed would attract restful spirits. You try neither, but you appreciate the enthusiasm. Historians still argue whether these guides were sincere efforts to help, or cleverly marketed nonsense, designed to soothe anxious housewives without threatening male medical authority. But either way, they served a purpose. They gave women tools, real or imagined, to take charge of their own discomforts. Some of the more daring guides even recommended sleep companions. No, not lovers, though heaven knows that might help, but objects, weighted pillows, warmed stones, a jar of honey kept on the nightstand, not for consumption, but for its calming golden hue. The Victorians believed that light mattered. Soft yellow candlelight was thought to lull the mind, harsh gaslight to disrupt it. You begin swapping candles for oil lamps and notice the difference. Your bedroom becomes a sanctuary, not a prison. And so you settle into a rhythm. Lettuce water one night, herbal blend the next. Sometimes both. You create a rotating system that would make a chemist proud. And as the weeks pass, something astonishing happens. You start to sleep. Not every night. But more nights than not. Your journal entries become less frantic. Slept well, you write on a Thursday, just that. 2 words, no notes, no footnotes, no herbs listed, just the plain miracle of sleep. That Thursday, you even smile at breakfast. Your husband notices. He still doesn't know the effort behind your transformation, but he grunts approvingly as he folds his newspaper. You look well today, he says, as if you simply chose wellness like a new bonnet. You say nothing, you just eat your eggs. One morning, while watering the roses, you spot a sprig of lemon balm growing wild by the garden wall. You laugh out loud, then you pick it. Of course you do. You're no longer just a lady suffering in silence. You're a sleep strategist, a nighttime tactician. You're not cured, but you've changed. And isn't that more interesting anyway? By now, your nightstand has become something of a curiosity. Where once there stood only a candlestick and a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, there's now a semi-permanent lineup of tincture bottles, tea strainers, crushed petals, and a tiny spoon that smells distinctly of anise. It resembles a magician's altar more than a place of rest. But if your magic trick is sleep, and that is, without exaggeration, the most sought-after illusion in your world, then it's worth the clutter. Tonight, your ritual is lemon balm tea, followed by a warm foot bath, and exactly 20 pages of a novel you've read 3 times already. It's the one with the girl who almost marries a clergyman, then thinks better of it after a significant inheritance. Nothing too emotional. You've learned the hard way that weeping over fictional characters right before bed is not, despite popular belief, conducive to slumber. This is the 6th week of your self-imposed sleep experiment, and the results are promising. You're sleeping longer, deeper. Dreams still come, but they've settled into that murky, harmless territory of misplaced umbrellas and endless staircases. You don't wake feeling reborn exactly, but you don't wake feeling destroyed either. You wake human, and that is no small thing. Outside the walls of your routine, however, the world turns on without sleeping a wink. You hear it in the gossip over tea. Mrs. Barlow collapsed at her piano, someone whispers. They say she hasn't slept properly since Easter. The group nods gravely as though sleeplessness were a scandalous affair. Someone tuts. Someone else mentions a recent article in the Times claiming that modern feminine habits are to blame. Historians still argue whether Victorian sleeplessness was truly on the rise, or whether it simply became more visible thanks to the expanding reach of the printed word and the anxious chatter of the rising middle class. What's certain is that by the 1870s, sleep, or lack thereof, was no longer just a private struggle. It was public concern. The medical establishment noticed. But rather than embrace the herbal potions and passion flower teas that women were already brewing in their parlours, physicians began to pathologize sleeplessness with alarming zeal. Suddenly there were new labels: hysteria somnolenta, nervous exhaustion, female restlessness disorder. None of them meant much, medically speaking, but they sounded impressive, and more importantly, they gave doctors permission to intervene, which unfortunately for many women meant dosing, sedating, or, if all else failed, removing. You read an article one morning about a woman in Kent who was sent to a rescue facility after 6 months of reported insomnia. The prescription? Total isolation. No books, no writing, and 12 hours a day lying still in bed. She was allowed no conversation, no walking, not even looking out the window. Just lying there, marinating in silence. It worked, allegedly. But you can't help but wonder whether the woman returned rested or simply broken. You shiver and return to your teas. Still, curiosity tugs at you. What if there are more structured treatments? What if your home experiments are only the beginning? You decide to investigate. It starts with a pamphlet. At the lending library, tucked between 2 novels involving high-waisted courtships and improbable inheritances, you find a folded piece of paper titled The Sleep Cure, Gentle Approaches for the Weary Mind. It's anonymous, of course, and probably published at someone's own expense, but it's filled with fascinating things. Begin your night 3 hours before retiring, it says. Engage only in gentle conversation. Consume no meat past 7. Avoid the turning of doorknobs with the left hand. That last one is odd, even for Victorian standards, but the pamphlet insists that the body's leftward leanings confuse the nervous system. You try it. That night, you only use your right hand for everything. You feel ridiculous. You sleep deeply. Coincidence? Likely. But the pamphlet has more. It suggests using soft bells before bed, tiny chimes rung 3 times in a slow pattern, to entrain the nerves to stillness. It recommends brushing one's hair exactly 100 times while reciting calming phrases. My limbs are clouds, my breath is wind, the moon is watching. It's spiritual nonsense, but it's charming, and oddly enough, comforting. You begin to see your sleep ritual not just as a treatment, but as a performance, an act. You are the actress, the director, and the audience all in one. Your props: lettuce, lemon balm, woolen socks. Your stage: a bedroom lit by flickering candlelight and populated by cats who refuse to honour personal space. And like all performances, the repetition becomes half the point. Still, even the best performers seek innovation, so you start experimenting with sound. Not music, too distracting, but texture. Background hum. Clara lends you a little wind-up device that mimics the soft drone of waves, although it sounds more like a man gargling in the distance. You try setting it in the hallway. The effect is soothing, if a bit unnerving. Eventually you learn to fall asleep to the rhythmic whoosh of your own heartbeat, amplified by pressing one ear to your feather pillow. You call it internal ocean. You don't share that name with anyone, not even Clara. Some things are best kept strange and secret. One night, you wake at 3:12 a.m. and wander downstairs to write a letter. Not out of panic, not out of dread, but simply because your body stirred and your mind wanted to do something lovely with the interruption. Dear night, you write. Thank you for the quiet. Victorian women didn't often have diaries like yours, filled with such personal meanderings. But letter writing, that was their refuge. When doctors failed them, when husbands dismissed them, when sleeplessness hollowed them out like carved apples left on windowsills, they wrote. To cousins, to friends, to themselves. You begin to understand why. There's power in addressing the silence directly, in saying, yes, I see you wakeful hours, but I'm not afraid. Eventually you return to bed. Sleep arrives without ceremony. No tinctures, no tea, just gravity and grace, and you begin to wonder, maybe that's the real lesson. Maybe sleep cannot be summoned like a servant. Maybe it arrives when you stop grasping for it like a child clutches after butterflies. Maybe sleep is the friend who only visits once you stop watching the door. By now you've begun calling yourself a collector of sleep. Not a sleeper, mind you. That title feels far too stable, too secure, like someone who simply lays down and drifts off without ritual or wrestling. No, you're more like an archivist of the moments that almost resemble rest. The rare nights of 7 unbroken hours are carefully folded into your memory like treasured letters, smoothed out and reread in the long, tired mornings that follow. You've grown deeply familiar with the way your bedroom transforms between twilight and dawn. The walls, so polite by day, seem to lean inward after midnight, almost curious about your plight. The mirror across from your bed, which during daylight merely reflects your bonnet at a proper angle, becomes a deep, dark pool of almost imagined movement. You try not to look into it too long. Even rational women have their limits. This evening you decide to attend something called a hygienic salon. You've heard of these strange new gatherings, part lecture, part demonstration, part awkward social experiment, where Victorian women pay a modest fee to hear from travelling health reformers. These self-appointed experts are usually men in loud waistcoats who believe strongly in things like air circulation, cold baths and clapping exercises. You suspect it will be deeply absurd, which is exactly why you go. The salon is held in a rented music room above a fishmonger's shop, and the smell is, unfortunately, not completely masked by lavender water. Still, the turnout is impressive. A dozen women in varying degrees of corset fatigue sit in folding chairs, waiting for the promised restful revelations. The speaker arrives, a man with an improbable moustache and the manner of someone who expects applause for pronouncing the word digestion. He launches into his topic, nocturnal disorders of the fairer sex, complete with poorly drawn anatomical diagrams and a small glass jar labelled Vapours Assorted. He believes, he says, that modern women's inability to sleep stems from interior clutter. Not literal, but moral and imaginative. Their brains are simply too busy with fiction, embroidery and idle fretting. His solution? A strict diet of turnips, light calisthenics at dusk, and prolonged eye-closing drills, wherein the lids are gently but deliberately lowered for no less than 20 minutes at a time, twice daily. You and the woman beside you, who smells faintly of eucalyptus and rebellion, exchange a glance. She raises one eyebrow. You stifle a laugh. When the lecturer invites questions, someone in the back asks whether sleep could be improved by banning husbands from the bedroom entirely. There is a pause. Then the room erupts in polite, scandalous giggling. You leave the salon with nothing useful but a sore stomach from stifled laughter. And honestly, that might have helped more than the turnips ever could. Historians still argue whether such health salons were genuine attempts to democratize medical knowledge or just travelling snake oil operations dressed in lace and Latin. What's undeniable is that they offered something rare to women of the era: public space, a reason to gather, to speak, to compare notes, to laugh at their shared absurdities. That night you don't sleep particularly well, but you dream of clapping exercises and a giant moustache shouting turnips into the sea. It's ridiculous and oddly delightful. And it reminds you, sleep isn't always about silence. Sometimes it's about feeling safe enough to let go, even briefly, even with nonsense in your head. The next morning, you read an article in the Ladies' Journal about nocturnal posturing. A new theory apparently that women are sleeping poorly due to improper body positions, and that certain postures, usually involving tying one's ankles together with a silk ribbon and elevating the knees with a small pyramid-shaped cushion, can bring about divine tranquility. You try it once. You look like a sacrificed cat goddess and feel like a trussed ham. But oddly enough, you drift off quickly. You wake sore, but victorious. Soon, you begin experimenting with pillow architecture. It becomes a bit of an obsession. You stack and arrange cushions of varying densities like an overly ambitious civil engineer, building a fortress against sleeplessness. There are high-altitude options for when your sinuses feel rebellious, side-leaning towers for headaches, and a very specific crescent configuration for evenings when melancholy creeps in like fog under the door. You even name them: the Stoic Swaddle, the Hush Helm, and, your favourite, the Duchess Slump. Clara visits and laughs until she nearly chokes on her biscuit. "Oh, you're truly mad now," she says affectionately. "Next you'll be stuffing your mattress with marigold petals and hope." You smile. "Don't tempt me." Of course, not every experiment is successful. You attempt a tincture of wild lettuce one night, curious about its soporific reputation. It tastes like bitter regret and makes your tongue feel oddly detached from your mouth. You sleep like a stone, but wake with a headache that suggests you've argued with God in your dreams and lost. That one goes back to the apothecary. Still, the failures are fewer than they used to be. You notice your neighbours noticing. "Your colour's better," says the woman 2 doors down as you pass on the way to the baker. "Whatever you're doing, keep at it." She doesn't ask, but her tone suggests she's desperate to know. There's a hunger in her voice that only the sleepless understand. You consider handing her a sachet of dried lemon balm with instructions scribbled in the margin of a prayer book. You don't, but you think about it. And speaking of the baker, he's recently begun selling something called midnight biscuits. Not for supper, not for breakfast, but for troubled hours, as the sign says. They're dense little oatcakes, heavy with nutmeg and honey. You try one. It's oddly comforting, like eating someone's grandmother's advice. You wonder whether other cities have midnight bakers. You hope they do. Sleep, you realise, has become an ecosystem, a private ritual and a public currency, a badge of honour when achieved, a secret wound when not. And you are one of many, quietly plotting your way toward peace. One afternoon you find a letter from Clara tucked under your doormat. It reads simply, "Dear friend, last night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Properly. Fully. As though wrapped in velvet and lullabies. It might have been the new mint hops blend, or it might have been your ridiculous pillow architecture. Or maybe just knowing I wasn't the only one pacing through the hours. Thank you. Yours, C. You press the letter to your chest and sit down in the doorway with your knees drawn up. The world is still noisy, still judgmental, still filled with men in salons shouting about turnips. But you're not alone. And that, more than tinctures or silken eye masks, is what finally begins to change everything. Your pillow fortress now borders on architectural masterpiece. Each night you rebuild it with the precision of a cathedral mason, adjusting for weather, mood, and any vague sense of shifting humours you've decided to entertain that week. You've added a bolster. Not just any bolster, but one that smells faintly of rosemary, stitched with a quote from Paradise Lost you found in a pamphlet about dream ethics for the pious matron. It says, "Dreams advise the soul when reason sleeps," which sounds helpful, if not exactly restful. But you aren't just building pillows anymore, you've begun building a sleep community. Clara brings her cousin Edith, who hasn't slept through the night since her engagement broke off in a hailstorm of poetry and poor judgment. Then there's Mrs. Winslow from 2 streets down, who hasn't dreamed since the cholera. You don't ask what that means. You just offer her a cup of warm barley tea with a curl of orange peel and a clean place to sit. What begins as casual visits becomes something else entirely. You call it the Society of Drowsy Ladies. There's no formal invitation, just a knock after dusk and the soft sound of slippers on your hallway floor. The rules are simple. No complaints about husbands or absence thereof. No comparisons of sleepless nights. And absolutely no talk of doctors unless it's to laugh at them gently. You gather in shawls. You sip strange infusions. You compare dreams like rare bird sightings. "Last night," Edith whispers, "I dreamt I was a tablecloth." There's a long pause, then everyone nods in solemn understanding. Historians still argue whether women's social networks in the Victorian era served primarily as emotional refuge or as quiet engines of soft rebellion. But here in your parlour, among the sound of spoons clinking and the rustle of shared silence, the answer feels clear. They were lifelines. Not grand acts of resistance, perhaps, but resistance nonetheless. You keep notes on everything, not just what herbs work, but what stories are told. Who seemed calmer after foot baths? Who needed more honey? Who cried when they finally dreamed of their mother again after 20 years of blank nights? You store these not in a notebook, but in your own quiet memory, a sort of living archive of sleep in its many imperfect forms. One evening, you're visited by someone new. She arrives nervously, hat in hand, lips pressed thin. Her name is Margaret. She's the vicar's wife, which makes everything feel a little scandalous. She doesn't sit at first, just hovers near the doorway, as though unsure whether she's allowed to join something this female. "I haven't slept more than 3 hours at a time in 15 years, she blurts. "I thought perhaps you had some lettuce water." You smile gently and guide her to a seat. You prepare her a cup, lavender, skullcap, and yes, lettuce steeped to its bitter edges. The drink is awful. She drinks every drop. Then the silence comes. Margaret doesn't talk much. But after her 3rd visit, she starts bringing her embroidery. And after the 5th, she brings a flask of something she calls celestial cordial. No one asks what's in it. But after 2 sips, everyone's cheeks look a little rosier, and someone begins humming a lullaby no one remembers learning. You've created something sacred. Not a salon, not a church, not even a tea club, but a space where sleep is not a punishment or a failure or a test of moral purity. It's a goal, yes, but a gentle one. A companion you coax, not capture. No more lying rigid in bed at 10:01 p.m, praying for unconsciousness like a penitent trying to summon an angel. Instead, you wander towards sleep slowly, arm in arm with others just as tired as you are. One night, Clara says something that lingers in your mind for days. "Do you think," she asks, "that maybe women can't sleep because there's no one watching over us once the lights go out? No one guarding our stillness? Maybe we're all too used to being the watchers, the listeners, the just-in-casers." Maybe our bodies forgot how to rest when no one's standing watch over the dark. No one answers right away, because of course that sounds entirely possible. That night you dream that someone is sitting at the foot of your bed, not threatening, just present. A silhouette, watching, guarding. You sleep longer than you have in months. You begin experimenting with creating that sense of safety, even artificially. You place a shawl over the back of a chair by your bed, make it look like a seated figure. You feel foolish the first few times, but it works. Something in your brain sees the outline and goes, "Ah, someone is here, I can let go." You call it your ghost friend. Clara finds this hilarious. She names hers Martha. Not all your society's experiments are so poetic. Mrs. Winslow tries a German contraption called a nerve stretcher, essentially 2 poles with ropes and a system of pulleys that claim to align the sleeping muscles. It looks like a torture device. She sleeps on it for 2 nights and wakes up cursing in Welsh. You quietly help her return it to the post. Meanwhile, Edith finds something that works astonishingly well. Reading aloud, not to herself, but to others. She has a voice like steamed milk, soft, slow, slightly sweet. She begins bringing worn books with her, not thrilling stories, but repetitive ones. Dry travelogues, a manual about wallpaper paste, sermons on agricultural metaphors. She reads, the rest of you listen. And sometimes, while she speaks about barley or God's most efficient birds, someone falls asleep sitting up. No one is embarrassed. The society becomes less of a club and more of a ritual. Wednesdays and Saturdays, teacups, cushions, soft lamps. You begin calling your home the quiet house. Some nights no one speaks for the first half hour, just breathing, just presence. You hang a tiny sign on the doorknob that reads, "Here we sleep slowly." One day a package arrives. No note, just a box filled with bundles of dried herbs, each one labelled in tidy handwriting. For dreaming of forests, for forgetting arguments, for remembering joy. You place them on the mantelpiece. Eventually you'll brew them, but not yet. For now, you just want to admire the thoughtfulness behind their creation. In a time when women are barely allowed to vote, barely allowed to speak without apology, you've carved out a space where they can simply rest. You don't take this lightly. It feels revolutionary, not dramatic, not with fireworks or marches, but in the soft, sleepy defiance of choosing to rest well in a world that constantly demands more. Sleep, it turns out, is a language of its own, and you're becoming fluent. By now, you've become something of a sleep detective, piecing together clues from late-night whispers, herbal experiments, and the occasional wild guess. You're less a victim of insomnia, and more an explorer of its peculiar geography. The terrain is uneven, marked by strange rituals, desperate hopes, and unexpected discoveries. One of the most curious finds in your nightly wanderings is the rise of sleep tonics, potions and elixirs that promise to usher you into slumber with the gentle push of a spoonful. You've tried many yourself, often with mixed results. Some taste like ancient rainwater soaked through with bitter roots and regret, while others leave you vaguely euphoric but wide awake. It's like taking a ride on a ghost train that goes nowhere. You hear about a new tonic that's sweeping through London's parlour rooms. It's called opium syrup, made from the poppy flower, and it's said to be a miracle for sleepless women. The idea of willingly taking something that dulls your senses feels both thrilling and terrifying. You're aware that it's a dangerous path. Historians still argue about the societal consequences of widespread opium use among Victorian women, but curiosity wins out. You manage to acquire a small vial from a discreet apothecary. The first sip is warm, almost sweet, slipping down your throat like velvet. Within an hour, your mind begins to soften at the edges, and the relentless ticking of the clock seems less urgent. You drift off into a hazy, dreamlike sleep that blurs the line between rest and escape. The next morning, you wake groggy but strangely calm, as if you've spent the night somewhere far away, beyond the noise of the world, you realise this isn't a sustainable solution. There are whispers of addiction, of blurred days and ruined reputations, but for one night, the siren song of oblivion feels like a kind mercy. Meanwhile, back in your society of drowsy ladies, you notice a subtle shift. Some women begin to talk less about methods and more about stories, tales of dreams that haunt or comfort, memories of peaceful childhood nights, even the way their mothers used to sing them to sleep. The air becomes thick with shared nostalgia, a collective longing for simpler rest. One member, Mrs. Talbot, tells you about a dream she had, where she was floating above the Thames, watching the city sparkle with lanterns and fog. She says the dream made her feel lighter than she has in years. You wonder if dreams themselves might be a form of rest, if the mind's journeys can soothe the body's exhaustion. This idea fascinates you. You start keeping a dream journal, scribbling down fragments, symbols, and moods as soon as you wake. You notice patterns, recurring rivers, lost keys, impossible staircases. Sometimes you share these with the group, sparking lively debates about what it all means. Historians still argue whether Victorian dream interpretations were a form of early psychology or simply fanciful superstition. But to you and your friends, they're a lifeline. You also delve into the strange world of sleep hygiene, a term you recently overheard at one of those odd health salons. It sounds scientific and promising, even if the advice is often contradictory. Some experts say to avoid reading by candlelight, others insist a warm bath before bed is essential. You try everything: cold water washes, chamomile tea, even the ridiculous no talking after 9 p.m. rule. You find that no single prescription works, but rather the rituals themselves, the predictability, the ceremony, offer comfort. It's the act of preparing for sleep that begins to quiet your racing thoughts. Of course, you keep an eye out for the more eccentric remedies too. One evening, a travelling quack passes through town selling electric sleep belts, claiming that a mild electric current can lull restless nerves into calm. You almost buy one before remembering you don't want to be a walking lightning rod. Yet, you admire the inventiveness. Sleep, it seems, is a puzzle that has confounded everyone, from doctors to lay women for centuries. As summer edges toward fall, you notice another strange trend: the popularity of sleep masks made from silk and lace, often embroidered with stars or delicate flowers. The idea is to block out all light, even the faintest glimmer from gas lamps or moonlight. You fashion one for yourself from an old scarf. The first time you wear it, it feels like putting a soft blindfold on your worries. You begin to understand that sleep isn't just about the absence of wakefulness. It's about creating a sanctuary, a space where your senses can relax, where your mind can wander safely, and where your body can finally surrender. There's a growing awareness among your group that rest is not selfish, it's essential. Revolutionary even, in a society that prizes productivity and decorum above all. One chilly October night, you host a special gathering. It's a sleep feast, where each woman brings a food or drink that they believe promotes rest. The table is a patchwork of herbal teas, warm milk, honeyed biscuits, and even small slices of spiced cake. The room fills with the scent of cinnamon and mint, laughter mingling with the clink of porcelain cups. You read aloud from a collection of lullabies from around the world, songs sung to soothe children to sleep across continents and centuries. The words wrap around you like a gentle blanket, and you notice more than one woman nodding off in her chair. This night feels like a milestone. The journey from desperate insomnia to tentative hope is long and winding, but you're no longer walking it alone. Sleep is no longer a distant dream, but a shared pursuit. A quiet rebellion against the noise of the world. You're stepping deeper into the labyrinth of Victorian medicine's approach to sleep. A world that's both intriguingly modern and frustratingly archaic. By the mid-19th century, doctors no longer view sleeplessness as simply a sign of moral weakness or laziness. Instead, insomnia is being redefined as a medical issue worthy of study, diagnosis, and treatment. Words like neurasthenia, a diagnosis for nervous exhaustion start to pepper medical journals and conversations. You find yourself both hopeful and skeptical as you sift through this new era of sleep science, wondering if the experts have finally cracked the code or if you're about to fall into yet another quagmire of bad advice. One of the most talked about cures of the time is the infamous rest cure, which sounds like a dream. Enforced bed rest, a diet rich in cream, eggs and fatty foods, and strict avoidance of any mental or physical exertion. Women, especially those labelled as nervous, are often prescribed this regimen. The doctor's orders are clear: lie still, do nothing, and allow your body and mind to heal through sheer inactivity. For many, this prescription feels like a relief, a sanctioned permission to stop fighting their exhaustion and simply rest. But, as you learn from whispered conversations and shared stories in your society of drowsy ladies, the rest cure often turns into a kind of prison. The enforced immobility can exacerbate feelings of helplessness and depression rather than curing them. You recall the story of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, a sharp-witted writer who endured the rest cure and found it so soul-crushing that she wrote The Yellow Wallpaper, a chilling tale that critiques how the treatment trapped women in mental and physical confinement. Historians still argue about whether the rest cure was a genuine medical advancement or a reflection of Victorian society's desire to control women's bodies and minds. Your discussions in the parlour circle grow more animated as you and your friends weigh the merits and dangers of such treatments. You all agree that while Victorian medicine is beginning to recognise insomnia as a real problem, its solutions often ignore the social and emotional roots of sleeplessness. Sleep, you realise, isn't just a biological need. It's tied up with identity, autonomy, and emotional well-being. Intrigued by the evolving field of psychiatry, you explore ideas suggesting that insomnia is connected to the mind's restless activity, stress, anxiety, and mental overload. And could your own relentless inner monologue be keeping you awake? Motivated by this thought, you try various mental exercises. Slow, deliberate breathing, counting backward from 100, or imagining yourself floating gently down a calm river. Sometimes, these exercises bring the peaceful rest you crave. Other times your mind rebels, racing faster as if protesting your efforts to quiet it. Around this time, you become aware of a fascinating invention that promises better sleep on the go: the sleeping car on trains. These carriages are padded and darkened, designed to help weary travellers rest during long journeys. You find the concept delightful. Even in the bustle of a modern industrial world, people recognise that sleep deserves special care and comfort. Yet, you're not naive. London's streets are noisy, gas lamps glow through your curtains, and the incessant hum of the city seeps into your nights. The very progress that promises easier living also brings a new kind of exhaustion. Meanwhile, you notice a surge in cultural images of serene sleeping women. The sleeping beauties in paintings and poetry, lying motionless as if enchanted into rest. These portrayals, though beautiful, seem to oversimplify the struggles you know too well. They almost mock the effort it takes to calm a racing mind and body. In your own home, you experiment with creating comfort zones inspired by new Victorian furniture designs, reclining chairs, adjustable beds, even private nap closets in the wealthiest houses. While such luxuries are out of reach for most, you improvise. You drape curtains around a small alcove, turning it into a personal cocoon where the day's chaos cannot reach you. Pillows and blankets become your fortress against the night's restlessness. One quiet evening, you try something new. A small music box that plays a gentle, repetitive melody, tinkling notes like raindrops falling on a window pane. The music calms your thoughts, wrapping around you like a soft lullaby from childhood. You realise that sound, carefully chosen, can soothe the mind and usher in sleep. Or, if harsh or erratic, it can do just the opposite. You experiment with other sounds, the steady ticking of a clock, the soft whir of a fan, the distant patter of rain. Some sounds become your trusted allies, others your foes. You begin to understand that sleep is not a simple on-off switch, but a delicate balance, an ecosystem where body, mind, environment and emotions interact in complex ways. It's a dance between your physical needs and mental state, between light, sound, comfort and anxiety. This awareness feels empowering. Even if a perfect cure doesn't exist, you have the tools to craft your own rituals and environments that encourage rest. You are no longer a passive sufferer of insomnia, but an active participant in your own sleep journey. As the nights grow longer and the chill of autumn creeps into your room, you feel a quiet confidence. You know that the quest for sleep is ongoing, full of setbacks and small victories, but every experiment, every new habit brings you closer to the elusive calm you seek. You are becoming not just a survivor of sleepless nights, but a true connoisseur of rest. You start to notice something fundamental about your battle with sleep. It's not just about your tired body or racing thoughts. It's also deeply about the world you fall asleep in, the air you breathe, the sounds you hear, the light that filters through your window, and the rituals you perform before closing your eyes. Victorian society, with all its quirks and contradictions, develops a fascinating obsession with what they call fresh air, as a cure-all for a variety of ailments, including the mysterious and maddening affliction of insomnia. Doctors, homemakers, and even poets sing the praises of fresh air. It's more than just a pleasant breeze or a scent from the garden. It's seen as a vital life force, a cleansing current that sweeps away the stale, harmful miasmas believed to cause disease. You hear phrases like airing out the lungs or ventilating the bedroom repeated with reverence. At night, even in the chill of winter, windows are cracked open to let the fresh, often cold air wash over you, believed to refresh the body and soothe the restless mind. You find yourself standing by your own window on those cold evenings, feeling the crisp air tickle your face and fill your lungs with something almost like hope. This practice isn't without its challenges. The air in London is heavy with the smoke of coal fires, a mixture of soot and sulphur that sometimes makes the concept of fresh a stretch. Yet even with the smoky haze that cold air carries with it smells of damp earth from nearby gardens, distant horse manure, and the faint tang of the Thames. This mix of scents, strange and comforting all at once, seeps into your room and becomes part of your nightly ritual. Inspired, you and your friends begin to experiment with ways to enhance this sense of freshness in your bedrooms. Lavender bouquets, chamomile sachets, and sprigs of rosemary become standard additions to your pillows and windowsills. These botanical touches, long used in folk medicine, blend ancient tradition with Victorian scientific optimism. Some swear by the calming effect of the lavender's scent, while others think it's just a pleasant distraction from the noise of the city. You discover that these rituals, placing sprigs of herbs, brewing special teas, airing out the bedroom, aren't just about physical effects. They serve a psychological purpose, a way to prepare your mind for rest. You find that the routine itself, repetitive, gentle, and predictable, offers a kind of mental reassurance. Historians still debate whether these practices had measurable benefits for sleep, or whether their power lay in the placebo effect, the mind's ability to soothe itself through familiar comforting habits. Digging deeper into Victorian apothecaries and medicine cabinets, you encounter an array of natural remedies touted for their sleep-inducing properties. Valerian root, hops, and passion flower are among the more well-known herbs, celebrated for their mild sedative effects. You carefully brew teas and tinctures, balancing hope against the bitter or earthy flavours. At the same time, you eye with suspicion the more dubious offerings, bottles labelled essence of opium or sleep drops that promise quick relief but carry hidden dangers. The introduction of the hypodermic needle around this time ushers in a new era of medical intervention. Morphine, once reserved for battlefield medicine, begins to be administered for chronic pain and sleeplessness. You're struck by the double-edged sword this represents. On one hand, a revolutionary means of relief, On the other, a pathway to addiction, especially among women seeking respite from relentless insomnia. You wonder how many suffer silently behind closed doors, caught in a cycle of dependency even as they chase elusive rest. Food, too, comes under scrutiny as an influence on sleep. Victorian doctors caution against heavy or spicy meals in the evening, advocating instead for lighter fare. Warm milk and honey become the quintessential bedtime drink, a soothing ritual that you adopt. You also learn about the curious Victorian obsession with lettuce water, an infusion made by boiling lettuce leaves, which is touted as a mild and natural sedative. You try it, finding the taste grassy and faintly vegetal, odd, but somehow comforting in its simplicity. Lettuce water becomes a topic of light-hearted discussion among your friends. It tastes like the salad was too tired to stay crisp, one jokes, while another swears by its calming effect. Yet paradoxically, caffeine's role remains confusing. Tea, rich in caffeine, is an inseparable part of Victorian life, enjoyed throughout the day and even late into the evening. You wrestle with this contradiction daily. How to enjoy the beloved ritual of afternoon and evening tea without sabotaging your sleep. Some of your circle switch to herbal infusions, while others rely on sheer willpower and an early bedtime to counter the stimulant's effects. Alongside diet and air quality, Victorian sleep hygiene rituals become elaborate ceremonies of self-care. Baths infused with lavender or rosemary are believed to relax both muscles and mind. You find that immersing yourself in warm water washes away not just physical dirt but the mental clutter of the day. The routine of brushing hair meticulously, changing into soft nightgowns of cotton or flannel, and arranging pillows just so becomes almost sacred. These acts signal to your body and mind that the day is done, and the transition into rest is beginning. What strikes you most is how much Victorian sleep culture, despite its quirks and excesses, anticipates modern ideas about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. The emphasis on routines, the reframing of mental habits, the controlled environment, they all serve to reduce anxiety and prepare the brain for rest. One quiet night, after your lavender bath and a cup of warm milk, you lie in bed and feel an unusual calm. The edges of your day blur and soften. The racing thoughts still flicker, but they're quieter now, more manageable. You realize that sleep isn't a single moment, but an experience to be cultivated, a combination of mind, body, environment, and ritual working together. It's a delicate ecosystem you learn to tend patiently. As your eyelids grow heavier and the world narrows to the soft darkness behind your closed eyes, you feel a small but profound victory. The journey toward rest is ongoing, full of fits and starts, but every small step brings you closer to the peace you crave. You're no longer just a victim of sleepless nights. You're becoming a gentle architect of your own dreams. You begin to sense that the story of sleep in Victorian England is not just about individual nights spent tossing and turning. It's a mirror reflecting the massive shifts happening in society at large. The century you find yourself in is buzzing with innovation, booming cities and swooping social changes. These new realities are altering the way people think about rest, health, and even the self. Sleep, once seen as a natural passive act, is suddenly thrust into the spotlight as something that needs to be managed, disciplined, and optimized. As you wander the streets, you overhear conversations and read medical journals filled with a new vocabulary: sleep hygiene, bedtime discipline, mental quietude. These aren't just words, they're instructions and prescriptions aimed at taming that wild beast of insomnia. The Victorian obsession with order and control extends into the bedroom. It's no longer acceptable just to fall asleep whenever and however you can. A proper sleeper is someone who adheres to strict schedules, avoids stimulants late in the day, limits exposure to light, and cultivates calm thoughts before bed. Sleep becomes a moral and social marker, something that sets the respectable apart from the disordered. In many ways, sleep starts to reflect Victorian values of self-control and industriousness. Falling asleep on time isn't just about health, it's a sign of good character and a well-ordered mind. Conversely, chronic insomnia or restless nights can be read as a failure, a weakness, or even a symptom of a nervous disorder, which carries its own social stigma. You think about how exhausting it must have been to feel responsible not just for your work or family, but for the very quality of your sleep, judged against rising societal standards. Amid these cultural shifts, you notice how sleep begins to take on new meanings across class lines. In middle and upper class homes, sleep is managed with care, even coached. You watch a mother carefully timing her baby's naps, whispering lullabies in a measured rhythm, guiding the child to sleep like a delicate science experiment. It's believed that training children to sleep properly not only safeguards their health, but shapes their future character. The nursery becomes a laboratory of sleep discipline, with clocks, charts, and strict schedules. Meanwhile, in the crowded and noisy homes of the working class, sleep is a much more fragile and precarious affair. Factory whistles, horse-drawn carriages, street vendors, and the general cacophony of industrial cities invade every corner of the night. Cramped living quarters with thin walls mean that noise is inescapable. Exhaustion might be abundant, but restful sleep is a luxury many cannot afford. You imagine factory workers snatching sleep in short, broken bursts, desperate for rest between shifts that rarely align with natural rhythms. Your curiosity is piqued by emerging scientific inquiries into what would much later be called chronobiology, the study of biological rhythms and their interaction with day and night. Even though it's in its infancy, the idea that sleep isn't a simple, one-size-fits-all block of time begins to take hold. You learn about segmented sleep, how people historically might have slept in two parts, with an hour or two of wakefulness in the middle of the night, used for prayer, reflection, or even visiting neighbours. Some historians argue whether this segmented sleep was a widespread norm before the rise of artificial lighting disrupted natural cycles. In literature and art, sleep becomes a rich source of symbolism and mystery. You find Victorian poets and novelists depicting sleep as a gateway to dreams and the unconscious, a peaceful refuge, or a haunting realm filled with nightmares. It is an intimate landscape where the boundaries between life and death, reality and fantasy blur. These artistic portrayals resonate with your own experience. Sleep is elusive, sometimes cruel, but always deeply human. But the modern city complicates this poetic vision. Gaslighting extends the day artificially, allowing shops to stay open late, streets to be busy after sunset, and social gatherings to stretch into the night. While this is thrilling, it also means the natural cues your body once relied on, sunlight fading, darkness falling, are interrupted. The flicker of gas lamps casts strange shadows on your walls. The distant clatter of carriages and the occasional shout from street vendors punctuate the night's quiet. You realise that the urban environment, with its noise and light pollution, is slowly becoming an enemy of peaceful sleep. Determined to reclaim some control, you try to create a sleep sanctuary. Heavy velvet drapes and blackout curtains help block out intrusive light. You fashion homemade eye masks from soft silk scraps, tying them gently around your head to shield your eyes. These small acts, seemingly trivial, mark a shift in how you approach sleep, from passive recipient to active architect. Your bedtime rituals become increasingly elaborate and precise. Fresh air still flows through a cracked window, carrying the coolness and scents of evening gardens. A small bouquet of lavender sits on your bedside table, releasing its calming fragrance. You sip a carefully brewed herbal infusion, perhaps chamomile or valerian, while a small clock ticks softly nearby, a rhythmic counterpoint to your slowing heartbeat. The combination of sensory inputs, cool air, soothing smells, warm drink, gentle sounds, creates an environment that whispers calm and security. Yet, the mind remains your biggest challenge. You catch yourself replaying worries, the pressures of work, concerns about family health, financial uncertainty. These mental loops are hard to break. Victorian self-help manuals suggest writing down your anxieties before bed to empty the mind. You take up the habit, scribbling your troubles on paper, hoping this act will exile them from your thoughts. Sometimes it helps, providing relief. Other times, it only adds another task to your nightly routine. Slowly, the hours pass. The fragile thread of sleep weaves its way through the night, ebbing and flowing. You feel the tender unfolding of rest's embrace, uneven, delicate, but deeply precious. Your pursuit of sleep is no longer just a personal struggle, but part of a broader Victorian story, one of rapid change, resilience, and hope. As your breathing steadies and the world fades away, you carry with you the lessons of this complex era, a time when sleep was both a science and a ritual, a challenge and a comfort, a necessity and a mystery. You close your eyes, ready to step gently into the quiet realm beyond waking, cradled by the soft legacy of Victorian nights. You wake with a start, or at least you imagine yourself waking. In truth, you're gliding through the story like a ghostly observer, watching the Victorians wrestle with their nights. And now, your journey brings you face to face with a cultural obsession that's beginning to bloom with almost religious fervour. The art of the perfect sleep schedule. Victorian doctors and homemakers alike begin to speak of rest as if it were a puzzle that could be solved with the right set of instructions. The evening routine becomes a sacred ritual. You watch families adjust the lighting, lower their voices, even schedule their meals around the impending moment of retiring. The word itself feels loaded with significance. To retire isn't just to stop working, it's to retreat, to surrender, to fold oneself into the darkness with care and purpose. Dinner is served earlier in the evening, with rich, heavy dishes increasingly discouraged. Doctors warn against stimulants like tea and coffee after a certain hour, though many households ignore this advice, given the comforting habit of a strong cuppa before bed. Still, the advice is clear. What you put into your body will ripple through your night. In wealthier homes, you observe a flurry of activity around airing the bedclothes. This isn't just about comfort, it's a matter of health and hygiene. Mattresses are lifted, sheets are shaken, and windows flung open to flush out stale air. You even spot a few bizarre methods, like warming the bed with a brass pan filled with hot coals, then immediately cooling it with a damp cloth to create therapeutic contrast. You can't help but smirk at the logic. Heating, then chilling, then collapsing into it like a fainting Victorian heroine. Historians still argue whether these nightly routines were primarily health-focused, or more about social signalling. After all, to be seen as someone who took their sleep seriously was to be seen as civilized, temperate, even morally upright. A properly conducted bedtime wasn't just about rest, it was a performance of virtue. And then there's the writing. Oh, the endless writing. Women in particular keep journals devoted to their sleep patterns, recording dreams, noting how many times they awoke, cataloguing what they ate beforehand, and whether they said their prayers. These journals read like delicate weather reports from the land of the unconscious. You wonder how much of this was driven by genuine curiosity, and how much by anxiety about getting sleep wrong. You come across one entry from a young woman who describes her dream as filled with silken threads and warm candlelight, though I awoke feeling queer and much disturbed. Another laments, though the infusion did its work, I found the darkness not restful, but oppressively silent. It seemed I could hear the stars turn. It's no wonder that sleep becomes so intimately tied to identity, especially for women. In a world where women are expected to be delicate, calm, and morally pure, restful sleep becomes part of their performance of femininity. A woman who sleeps well is one who is balanced, graceful, in control. A woman who cannot sleep, she's seen as unstable, overwrought, even dangerous. The pressure is immense. You notice the gender divide at every turn. Men's sleep, while also subject to some scrutiny, is treated more as a medical matter, overwork, digestive issues, or exposure to stimulants. But women's sleep is frequently described in terms of temperament and emotion. You read warnings in women's magazines about how too much worry, excessive reading before bed, or even overexcitement from social events could disturb a lady's delicate constitution. One editorial even claims, "A woman's soul rests only when her mind is properly hushed." You'd roll your eyes, but your lids are already heavy. In the upper echelons of society, sleep becomes a competitive sport. Some women attend sleep lectures by visiting experts. These talks, often held in salons, involve demonstrations of posture, instructions on the correct way to breathe, and, your personal favourite, sample lullabies sung in perfect French to calm the nerves. The attendees sit with rapt attention, as if each syllable could bring them closer to the elusive shores of slumber. Yet, beneath the surface of all this proper procedure lies a mounting anxiety. What if you do everything right and still don't sleep? What if the chamomile fails you? Or your linen sheets feel like sandpaper? Or your body simply won't obey? That's when you begin to see the rise of the sleep specialist. These early sleep doctors often blur the line between science and snake oil, offering nerve tonics, electric massages, and curious devices meant to lull the body with low vibrations or gentle rocking. Most of them, of course, are wildly overpriced and dubiously effective. You see one advertisement for a contraption called the somnoscope, which promises to induce dreamless sleep in 15 minutes or less using galvanic harmony. It looks suspiciously like a toaster with wires. Still, desperate patients flock to it, and who could blame them? When the nights are long and the mind won't shut off, you'll try anything. You understand the Victorian woman sitting at her vanity, rubbing lavender oil onto her temples, humming softly in the dark. You recognise the man who lies in bed counting the creaks of the old house, each one louder than the last. You feel for the insomniac child whose mother strokes her hair while whispering stories about sheep and angels. The deeper you go into this world, the more you realise that sleep is never just sleep. It's health, it's virtue, it's class, it's control, and it's incredibly fragile. You return to your room in this imagined past, drawing the heavy drapes closed against the gaslight flickering outside. You sip a final mouthful of cooling mint water and stretch beneath the crisp white sheets. Your pillow smells faintly of rosewater. The clock on your bedside table ticks steadily, like a patient heartbeat. Maybe tonight will be the night. You awaken, or rather you drift onward, to the sound of something surprisingly familiar. A ticking clock, steady as a heartbeat. In the hush of a Victorian bedroom, that gentle tick-tock has become more than just a reminder of time passing. It's a metronome for the anxious mind, a rhythmic lullaby meant to soothe the weary into sleep. And tonight, you're about to discover just how deeply this obsession with timekeeping has sunk into the Victorian soul. Time, once dictated by the sun and the church bell, is now governed by machines. Clocks are everywhere, on mantels, beside beds, on public towers looming above the city skyline. Even in homes where money is tight, a small alarm clock is considered essential, not for waking but for watching. Because here's the curious thing. Victorians are no longer just concerned with getting to sleep. They want to track it, measure it, master it. This new compulsion to monitor rest emerges from the same culture that birthed the punch card, the factory whistle, and the railway timetable. Industrialization has taught people that time is currency, and any hours spent idly tossing and turning are hours lost. Wasted, even immoral. You see it in pamphlets advising workers to rise at dawn, and in household manuals warning mothers that a child who oversleeps may be on the path to ruin. Oversleeping is a vice. Undersleeping is a disease. Welcome to the Victorian paradox. In wealthier homes, the ticking clock becomes a nighttime companion, carefully placed on the bedside table, where it can be both seen and heard. But in working-class quarters, the relationship with time is more conflicted. Many families can only afford one timepiece for the whole household, and it's often kept in the kitchen or main room. Still, sleep is just as anxiously observed, with people estimating the hour by the distant chime of the church bell, the sound of carts starting up in the street, or simply by instinct sharpened through years of routine. And if you're struggling with insomnia, you're expected to document it. You come across a housewife's diary that reads like a sleep lab report. Retired at 9, slept until 10:15, awoke with stomach unease, dozed intermittently until 2:40, dreamt of father's watch ticking, rose at 6, took bitters. Each line a record of her body's betrayal. Each minute accounted for like a ledger in a failing business. Victorian sleep becomes a thing to achieve, like a perfectly iced cake or a neatly trimmed lawn. In some circles, particularly among middle-class women, conversations turn to whose sleep schedule is the most regimented. My husband insists we extinguish the lamps at precisely 9:30, one might boast, while another replies, we dine no later than 6 to ensure full digestion before bed. It's social one-upmanship, but with blankets. Yet ironically, all this pressure to perfect the night often has the opposite effect. You begin to notice a subtle rise in anxiety around bedtime. People fret about falling asleep too slowly. They time themselves to the minute. If they don't drift off quickly enough, they worry they've failed the night. And the worry itself becomes the very thing keeping them awake. You can't help but smirk. Even with all their gadgets and rules, the Victorians are still battling the same thing you do. A brain that just won't quiet down. In some of the more avant-garde health circles, you hear talk of natural sleep rhythms. There's growing skepticism of clocks altogether. One particularly poetic physician claims that the body has a timekeeper more accurate than brass hands or a pendulum. It ticks behind the eyes and hums beneath the ribs. His ideas are considered fringe, bordering on mystical. Still, they're quietly appealing. After all, who wouldn't rather listen to their body than a cold metal tick? This budding skepticism gives rise to alternative methods of timekeeping, some charming, some outright ridiculous. You find someone who claims to know it's midnight because their cat starts to purr in a certain key. Another swears that rubbing one's feet with mustard oil will make you drowsy exactly 38 minutes later. And there are always the human alarm clocks. Men paid to knock on windows with sticks at a set time to wake workers up for their shifts. Their existence reminds you that before time was mechanical, it was communal, messy, and oddly personal. Still, the dominant culture marches forward with precision. Sleep advice books now include elaborate schedules for the ideal Victorian night. One best-selling manual insists that a man must retire by 10 p.m. sharp and rise by 5:30. Take a brisk walk, then a cold bath, and follow that with mild calisthenics and cheerful silence. Silence, of course. Can't have too much excitement before breakfast. Children, too, are placed on sleep schedules that would make a modern parent blink. Some are expected to nap twice a day, take cod liver oil before bedtime, and say prayers for exactly 3 minutes while kneeling on a carpet that's been precisely fluffed. The micromanagement is staggering. One governess confides in her diary that she timed a child's bedtime routine down to the brushing of teeth, 30 strokes top and bottom, because sloppiness before sleep breeds weakness in the soul. Historians still argue whether all these schedules were strictly followed or more aspirational in nature. Some believe many families read the manuals and did their best to approximate them. Others suggest the books were more like Victorian Instagram, snapshots of a life no one was truly living, but everyone was pretending to. In any case, the obsession with measuring sleep bleeds into medicine. Physicians begin to speak of sleep debt and sleep efficiency, using terms that feel startlingly modern. They weigh patients' sleep hours like gold, prescribe rest in doses, and even develop elaborate charts that track nighttime wakefulness events. You see one chart with so many coloured lines it looks like the London Underground. The patient was just trying to get some shut-eye, and yet, the more sleep is tracked and scheduled, the less magical it seems. There's something lost when the night becomes a spreadsheet. You start to understand why some Victorians rebel against it. The romantic poets, always lovers of mystery and moonlight, write odes to the unmeasured night. For them, sleep is not a task but a journey. They reject the tick-tock tyranny. and instead fall into rest like waves into the sea. You find yourself caught between these worlds, the comfort of structure and the allure of surrender. And as you gaze at the softly ticking clock on the mantel, you wonder, what if sleep is not something to be conquered, but simply welcomed? You turn away from the clock, just for tonight. You sink deeper now, not into the mattress, but into something stranger, something dreamlike. The ticking of clocks fades away, replaced by rustling paper and whispered voices. You're moving through the pages of Victorian dream journals, and the air is thick with symbols, omens, and more than a little romantic doom. Yes, this is where things get weird. The Victorians weren't just obsessed with sleeping, they were obsessed with what happened when they slept. Dreams weren't dismissed as idle fancies. They were examined like artifacts, dissected, and interpreted with breathless intensity. You float over nightstands cluttered with half-filled diaries, ink bottles, and notes scrawled hastily in the dark. There's always a candle stub nearby. Dreaming, it turns out, demands good lighting for documentation. You read entry after entry. Dreamt of violets blooming in December. Mother appeared with a bowl of milk. Felt uneasy. Or, was flying above the Thames, then drowning, woke weeping. The entries are often brief, cryptic, haunted, and overwhelmingly feminine. It seems Victorian women, discouraged from expressing themselves openly during the day, found a curious sort of freedom at night. One dreamer describes recurring visions of being locked in a greenhouse, surrounded by overripe fruit and bees that speak in Latin. Another dreams of her husband's second wife, though she is unmarried. It's not hard to read between the lines. Historians still debate whether these dreams were really remembered so vividly or reshaped during the act of recording, altered to suit emotional needs or literary flair. Some suggest that the journals were therapeutic, a socially acceptable outlet for inner life. Others argue they were simply another way to perform Victorian femininity. Delicate, introspective, slightly tragic. Whatever the motive, the fascination with dreams spirals into full-blown culture. Dream dictionaries become wildly popular, with thick volumes offering definitions for hundreds of symbols. Dream of snakes. That means betrayal. White birds, peace. Falling teeth. You guessed it. Death. Always death. The Victorians rarely passed up a chance to turn something innocent into a dire warning, and they don't stop at interpretation. Many turn to dream incubation, the idea that you can control what you dream by focusing your mind before sleep. You watch one woman meticulously arrange items on her bedside table, a photo of her late father, a rose petal pressed between pages of scripture, and a small pillow scented with lilac. She lies back and repeats softly, "Show me the garden, show me the garden." Whether she finds it or not, you don't know, but the ritual is soothing in its own strange logic. Some Victorian thinkers go even further, turning dreams into spiritual missions. You come across pamphlets from fringe Christian sects urging followers to listen for prophecy in the sleeping mind. One reverend writes that dreams are the last honest voice of the soul, a nightly telegram from God. Others, influenced by Eastern philosophy, believe dreams offer glimpses of past lives or astral travel. In wealthier households, seances sometimes begin not with chanting, but with a recounting of strange dreams, the air already thick with velvet and expectation. And yet, alongside this deep reverence, there's growing scientific curiosity. The nascent field of psychology is beginning to tug at dreams with its tweezers and scalpels. Sleep specialists, men with bushy beards and stern eyes, start suggesting that dreams might come from something other than the divine. Maybe they're mental residue, maybe they're memory sorting, maybe, just maybe, they're nothing at all. This tension between mysticism and science creates a fascinating split. You find one woman's journal where she writes, "I dreamt of a silver gate, and through it my mother called to me." Then on the next line, in a different ink, "Perhaps it was merely indigestion. I had goose." It's hard not to chuckle at their internal contradictions. So human, so familiar. Wanting to believe in something larger, but also needing an explanation that fits into neat, rational boxes. They want magic and method all at once. But the dreams keep coming. During times of national mourning, like after Prince Albert's death in 1861, people flood newspapers with dream accounts. "I saw the prince in a garden of lilies," one letter reads. "He smiled but didn't speak." Entire articles are dedicated to shared visions, as if the collective unconscious is humming louder during grief. Even Queen Victoria herself is rumoured to have kept a dream diary, though it's never found. Some say she used lavender-scented ink and wrote in a cipher only her ladies-in-waiting could decode. It might be pure fantasy, but you kind of hope it's true. And of course, not all dreams are poetic. Nightmares feature heavily too, particularly among the anxious and the overworked. One servant girl records visions of rats crawling from her ears, and another writes about dreaming she gave birth to a clock. That one gives you pause. You imagine the gears ticking inside a baby-shaped bundle, its tiny hands pointing to midnight. Doctors begin to see dreams as indicators of mental imbalance. A young woman who reports dreams of drowning more than twice a week might be diagnosed with nervous melancholia and prescribed isolation, or, worse, electrotherapy. It's a dangerous game. Talk too little about your dreams and you're repressed. Talk too much and you're mad. You wander into a boarding school for girls where the mistress insists on nightly prayers but forbids dream discussion in the mornings. It fills their heads with foolishness, she sniffs. The students naturally trade dream stories in whispers anyway, sketching scenes on their chalk slates when no one is looking. One girl draws a stairwell spiralling up into the clouds with the caption, "Where I went Tuesday night." These dreams, fragile, theatrical, often surreal, form an invisible second world underneath the tightly laced corsets and rigid etiquette. For many, it's the only place where they can cry, shout, fall in love, or fly. A secret rebellion beneath the sheets. And now, as you drift toward your own dreaming, you wonder what messages might await you in the dark. A garden gate, a clock with no hands, or maybe just the familiar hush of a world winding down. You don't need to write it down. You'll remember. You keep sinking, not falling exactly, just descending softly through a kind of velvet hush. All around you now, the air is filled with faint humming, the distant clink of glassware, and the heavy perfume of something botanical and peculiar. You've landed in the heart of the Victorian apothecary, where sleep is less a biological function and more a prescription, bottled and shelved behind rows of handwritten labels. It smells of camphor, laudanum, rosewater, and something slightly burnt. You trail your fingers over dark green glass bottles labelled elixir for night tremors, lettuce tincture, mild strength, and draught of poppy. This is the world of Victorian sleep medicine, and it is as deeply chaotic as it is strangely beautiful. Let's start with the basics. If you're a Victorian and you can't sleep, chances are your first stop is the local chemist. Unlike today's tightly regulated pharmacies, Victorian chemists are part medicine men, part alchemists, and part theatrical performers. Many prepare their own remedies on site, grinding herbs in a mortar while offering unsolicited advice about your temperament, your digestive habits, and, of course, your dreams. The go-to cure for insomnia, laudanum. It's a heady mixture of opium and alcohol, sometimes with saffron or cinnamon to sweeten the nerves. Sold openly and cheaply, laudanum is taken by nearly everyone at one point or another. Men, women, children. Your neighbour takes it for headaches. Your grandmother takes it for melancholy. Your cook takes it when she misses her dead cat. And you? Well, you were just hoping for some sleep. One popular blend boasts that it provides peaceful slumber for the overtaxed mind. Another, more bluntly, promises dreamless unconsciousness. But here's the rub. It works until it doesn't. Take too little, and you lie awake counting ceiling cracks. Take too much, and you risk slipping into the kind of sleep you don't wake from. Victorians know this, but many don't stop. Because insomnia, to them, is more than unpleasant. It's a social failure, and a nightly threat to one's moral fibre. Historians still debate whether Victorian women were uniquely vulnerable to sleep medicine addiction, or if men simply hid theirs better. What's undeniable is that women were more frequently prescribed sedatives by physicians, and more likely to be told that sleeplessness was a result of female hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis that, conveniently, could be soothed with anything that dulled the senses, including chloral hydrate, a drug so potent it was nicknamed knockout drops. Some husbands even slipped it into their wives' tea, convinced they were helping. You move past the laudanum and find another curious favourite, lettuce water, brewed from the sap of wild lettuce. Yes, really. Known as Lactuca virosa, this leafy green cousin of your Caesar salad was believed to have mild sedative effects. Steeped and strained into a light tonic, it was marketed as nature's nightcap. Victorian recipe books even included instructions for brewing it at home. Boil the leaves, let steep, and sip before bed while repeating soothing Bible verses. Does it work? Maybe. The science is murky, but the placebo power of believing in lettuce should never be underestimated. Alongside these gentler remedies, there's also a booming market for more theatrical solutions. There are inhalable vapours, applied by soaking handkerchiefs in camphor or chloroform. There are aromatic pillows stuffed with dried hops, lavender and rosemary, one for the head, another under the knees, a third clutched to the chest for optimal nervous realignment. You picture someone tucked under 3 feather quilts, surrounded by little sacks of dried herbs, looking less like a sleeper and more like a Victorian tea cosy. And then, of course, there's the sleep mask. Not the soft modern kind, but a stiff contraption resembling a leather blindfold crossed with a horse bridle. Intended to block out light and keep the eyes from overactivity, it usually fails at both. Still, women wear them loyally, hoping the weight over their face will coax them into unconsciousness. Men sometimes opt for brass forehead bands soaked in peppermint oil, believing they realign nerve tides. As odd as these treatments sound, there's something undeniably tender about them. Each ritual is its own little prayer to Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams, whom many Victorians name-check in bedtime literature. They don't just want to sleep. They want to be held by sleep, forgiven by it, wrapped in a shroud of velvet forgetting. And sometimes that desire draws people into more dangerous territory. Enter the travelling sleep tonics, sold by charismatic quacks who set up on street corners or travel with circuses. These bottles contain everything from valerian to vodka to turpentine. Yes, turpentine. Promised results range from soothing moonlit rest to comas on command. Side effects include everything from nosebleeds to, well, death. But the showmanship sells, the bottles glitter, the salesman sings, and the audience, tired and desperate, buys in. Not all sleep remedies are ingested. You find a strange contraption called the night harmonium, a small crank-powered music box designed to emit a continuous hum tuned to a frequency believed to calm the cerebral waters. It sounds like an asthmatic cricket. Still, some swear by it. In wealthier households, treatments get even more luxurious, and even less effective. A duchess installs a mechanical bed that rocks gently all night like a crib. Another commissions a ceiling mural of soft clouds painted in phosphorescent oil so she can fall asleep beneath the firmament. Neither reports great results, but the Instagram value, if such a thing existed, would have been unbeatable. And then there's the food. Oh yes, food-based sleep hacks were very Victorian. Hot milk with nutmeg, bread soaked in sherry, oatmeal with valerian root. Sleep pies filled with stewed pear and lettuce. Some people even eat raw onions before bed, believing they draw the day's fire from the blood. Romantic? Not particularly. Effective? Debatable? Breath freshening? Definitely not. Doctors begin to caution against over-medicating, but their warnings are usually ignored. Why? Because the fear of insomnia is stronger than the fear of dependency. To lie awake night after night listening to your own breath, your own thoughts, it's unthinkable. It feels like madness nibbling at the corners of your mind. If you can silence that with a few drops of something sweet and syrupy, why wouldn't you? Of course, not all sleep aids come from the bottle. You overhear women swapping household tricks, braiding their hair a certain way to calm the scalp, warming bricks by the fire to place at the feet, or keeping a glass of water under the bed to collect the night's unease. You don't know whether it's superstition or science, but it all feels like care. Tiny acts of gentleness in a world that demands so much. And perhaps that's the heart of it. Beneath all the strange brews, the dangerous drafts, the lettuce-infused pillows, there's something heartbreakingly human, a desire to surrender, a longing to be released from the endless march of thought, a hope that maybe, just maybe, sleep will find you tonight. You lie back now, surrounded by ghosts of tonics and ticking clocks, and you wonder, if you lived in Victorian times, would you reach for the laudanum or the lettuce water? Or would you try to outwait the night with nothing but breath and hope? Either way, the darkness wraps around you. The room hushes even further now, like the final whisper in a theatre before the curtain rises. The stage, your own bedroom. The performance, a full symphony of nightly rituals. Curious, strict and oddly poetic. Because while Victorians loved their tonics and their lettuce brews, they also believed that the key to sleep was behaviour. Your behaviour. So now you hover in the dim glow of a gas lamp, watching as the evening routine unfolds with the precision of a military exercise, or perhaps more like a bedtime ballet, set to the ticking of a well-polished mantel clock. Let's begin with the clothing. You'd think Victorian nightwear would be dull, but you'd be wrong. There are entire fashion guides devoted to what one should and shouldn't wear to bed. Women's nightgowns are long, linen, sometimes laced, sometimes flannel, with hand-stitched embroidery that no one but their pillows will see. And slippers? Always. To walk barefoot is to tempt bronchial death. Men often wear full nightshirts, belted like robes, and many top the ensemble with a tasseled nightcap. Not to be theatrical, though, let's be honest, it is a little theatrical, but to trap the body's warmth and prevent roomy breezes from affecting the brain. Yes, that's a real concern. Cold air, they believe, might enter through the ears and damage the nerves, so naturally your head must be wrapped like a croissant. And then, of course, there's the bedroom itself. A Victorian sleep sanctuary is carefully curated. The room must be dark, but not too dark. A low fire should be kept burning if the night is cold, but not too strong, or the air will become spoiled. Windows are to be cracked slightly open, regardless of temperature, because fresh air is thought to circulate the humours. Curtains are drawn, then undrawn, then checked again. Beds are turned down with precision, and pillows are plumped just so, lest they encourage throat congestion. You observe one woman perform this entire ritual with the grim intensity of a surgeon. She even presses her sheets with a warm flat iron before lying down, muttering, "A warm sheet is a quiet mind." Some households go further. In upper-class homes, a maid may be tasked with airing the bed before sleep, literally turning down the covers and gently waving a fan to dispel any stale energies. You can't help but think of it like ghost busting, but for bad vibes. And let's not forget hygiene. Victorians are very specific about what should happen to the body before sleep. For women, a tepid sponge bath. Never too hot, never too cold. The water may be infused with rose, lavender or mint, and the washing is always done in a particular order. Arms, face, neck, then feet. Why? Feet carry the day's weight, and cleaning them last is considered a spiritual release. It's oddly beautiful. Men might wash their hands and face, apply a shaving tonic, even if they're not shaving, and comb their moustaches into submission. Some dab whiskey behind the ears. Why? No one knows. Possibly habit. possibly the eternal search for rugged elegance. But ritual doesn't stop with the body or the room. It stretches into behaviour. Victorians believe your actions in the hour before bed directly affect your soul's passage into slumber. So there are rules. No arguments after sunset. No upsetting novels, only gentle poetry or uplifting scripture. No heavy dinners, no alcohol, and definitely no piano music in a minor key. You remember reading a diary entry from a woman who claimed that hearing Chopin's funeral march after 8 p.m. caused her to dream of a cat made of smoke that refused to leave her wardrobe. Make of that what you will. And then there's prayer. Whether religious or just traditional, many Victorians end their day on their knees. You pass bedroom after bedroom where people clasp their hands, bow their heads and speak quietly to the dark. Some pray for peace, some for health, some just for the ability to sleep through the night without waking drenched in sweat or thought. Prayer blends easily into something more intimate, journaling. The Victorian diary is not just for big events, it's a nightly companion, especially for women. They write down their dreams, their anxieties and their triumphs, however small. I found the lace I thought lost. I did not cry in front of him. The moon tonight was forgiving. These are not just bedtime habits. They're mental balm. Historians still argue whether these rituals were soothing in themselves or simply distractions from deeper unrest. Some say they were genuine attempts at self-care in a repressed world. Others argue they were just another layer of performance, another way to live acceptably in a society that constantly watched. But even if it was performative, does that make it any less real? As you settle deeper into the scene, you begin to notice how much of the Victorian bedtime routine was about control. In a world that changed rapidly, industrial smoke rising, railroads screaming, empires expanding, bedtime remained one of the few predictable things. You might not control your husband's moods, your social station, or your waistline, but by God, you could iron your pillowcase into serenity. Even children weren't exempt. Their routines were equally elaborate: bath, story, prayer, teeth powdering, not brushing, just powdering, and a lullaby sung in soft tones. You smile as you watch one mother sing Rock-a-Bye Baby in a key so high it sounds like a bird weeping into a teacup. Some rituals veer into the absurd. A woman ties a blue ribbon around her ankle each night to confuse night spirits. Another insists that sleeping with a closed parasol under the bed ensures no burdens will find you. Are these superstitions? Absolutely. But also, they work. If not in logic, then in comfort. You move now to a quieter room, where an elderly man lays out 7 coins on his dresser in a precise pattern before bed. He says it represents the days of the week and keeps time orderly. No one told him to do this. He just decided years ago that the world slept more peacefully when time was in its place. It's pointless. It's lovely. And somewhere in the distance, a maid is whispering to her reflection in the mirror, "Tomorrow will be lighter." It's not a ritual anyone taught her, but it's hers. A modern therapist might call it an affirmation. She calls it talking sense into the shadows. Eventually the ritual's slow. You feel the rhythm quiet. The last candle is snuffed, the curtains stirred, and the house, any house, your house, leans into its exhale. The body rests, yes, but more than that, the mind releases its grip. And in that release, there is a promise. That sleep is not just absence, but a return. A place where things make less sense but feel more true. So now, whatever your own ritual is, whether it's a warm drink, a pillow arranged just right, or simply this strange journey through Victorian sleeplessness, you let it carry you. The hour is late, the world is folded in, and sleep at last is listening. Somewhere between the tick of the parlour clock and the settling sigh of the chimney, you find yourself floating again. This time through a different kind of quiet. Not the anxious hush of insomnia or the bustling silence of household routines, but the deep, subdued calm of a culture slowly waking up to a question it doesn't quite know how to ask. What if sleeplessness isn't just a medical issue or a moral failing, but a social one? It's the late 19th century now, and slowly, hesitantly, the Victorian world is beginning to shift. You land softly in a drawing room where a woman sits upright in an armchair, her eyes wide despite the late hour. She's not reading, not praying, just thinking. The gas lamps hum faintly above her, casting flickering shadows across the wallpaper, and in her lap rests a journal unopened. Her name might be Charlotte, or Eleanor, or maybe even Anne. She's not ill, she's not hysterical, she's just tired, and yet unable to sleep. And for the first time, she's beginning to wonder if she's the problem, or if the problem is the world she lives in. This is the quiet beginning of social critiques around insomnia, when some Victorian women started pushing back against the polite fiction that their sleeplessness was purely personal. They began to wonder, could it be connected to expectation, isolation, the staggering demands placed on them without recognition or release? Because let's be honest, the average Victorian woman's life is a paradox. She's expected to be both delicate and durable, obedient yet morally superior, emotionally intuitive but not emotional. By day, she may be supervising the household, instructing children, hosting guests, attending to correspondence, keeping up with charitable obligations, and somehow, always, looking presentable. By night, she's expected to vanish quietly into the linens, refreshed by dawn. Where in all that is there room for herself? Historians still argue whether the sleeplessness so many women reported was physical in nature or emotional. Was it a matter of overwrought nerves, as the physicians insisted, or something deeper, harder to treat with valerian and warm milk? More and more, diaries and private letters began to reveal the truth. Women weren't just sleepless. They were overloaded, understimulated, and emotionally stranded in gilded cages. You find a letter from a governess named Hester, written in 1888, in which she confesses, "There is no one to whom I speak freely all day. I brush the children's hair. I nod politely. I say yes, sir, and no, ma'am. And at night, I cannot close my eyes. I lie perfectly still, screaming only inside." It's heartbreaking, it's telling, and it's not unique. More and more women begin to write like this. Not all of them governesses or servants. Some are middle-class wives, others educated daughters with too little to do and too much to bear. They speak of tightness in the chest, of a mind that won't stop rehearsing conversations, of strange dreams when sleep finally comes that leave them more exhausted than before. They write not in journals meant to be published, but in margins and scraps, with a kind of honesty that hums through time, and gradually that hum becomes a whisper of resistance. You pass through a parlour where a woman leads a discussion group on modern nerves. No men present. They're not welcome here, not because they're hated, but because they don't understand. One woman says, "Perhaps I cannot sleep because I do not rest during the day. I perform. I do not exist." The others nod, grateful, relieved. This is where the early feminist movement intersects quietly with the world of sleep. Not with slogans or protest signs, but with questions. What does rest mean when you don't feel at home in your life? What does recovery mean when no one believes you need it? And how can you drift off peacefully if you've never felt truly seen? And it's not just women of means. Working class women too write about sleeplessness. Not from philosophical unrest, but from physical exhaustion and relentless worry. A factory girl named Lucy writes that she lies awake rehearsing the day's mistakes. Another Sarah writes of the terrible tension between needing rest and being afraid of the next day's hunger. For them, insomnia is not a condition. It's an unavoidable part of being alive. And yet society still responds with lavender sachets and lemon balm tea. Eventually, some brave women begin to write publicly. Magazine essays appear with titles like "On Sleeplessness in Gentle Women" and "The Tyranny of the Night." One even makes it to a medical journal, "Reflections on Female Nervous Disorders," a suggestion that they're not imaginary. It causes quite a stir. A male physician responds by claiming the article is emotionally inspired but medically unfounded. The author replies anonymously in a newspaper with the line, "If our imaginations are so powerful as to manifest symptoms, perhaps you ought to stop ignoring them." You can almost hear the teacups rattle. Other women take quieter paths. Some start painting late at night. Others write poetry. Some pace the halls, imagining a world in which they might sleep simply because they are safe. Not from burglars, but from judgment. These acts, though small, begin to add up. In time, some doctors begin to listen. Not many, but a few. A progressive physician named Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson begins to talk about insomnia as a potential symptom of what she calls soul fatigue. She doesn't mean it religiously, more like existential exhaustion. She writes, "The woman who cannot sleep may not be broken. She may simply be breaking through." You pause on that. Maybe that's what this is all about. The night for the Victorian woman becomes the one space where she is not performing. Not decorating, not moderating, not mending, not educating, not bearing. She's simply there, with herself. And sometimes that self has something to say. Something hard, something loud, something that keeps her eyes open long after the candles have burned low. Not all women saw their insomnia as a crisis. A few saw it as a gift. A painter in Bath writes that she gets her best ideas at 3 a.m, when the house is silent and the world no longer expects anything from her. A writer named Nell pens her stories between 1 and 4 a.m, calling it her secret window. She later publishes a collection titled Night Thoughts by Lamplight, anonymously of course, but it sells well enough to pay her rent for 6 months. These women aren't cured of their insomnia. They learn to live with it, to find meaning in it, to bend it into something that resembles freedom. And maybe that's what makes this chapter in Victorian history so quietly powerful. It's not about medicine, or even about science. It's about noticing, listening, naming a thing that had long been dismissed. So you drift now through the final drawing rooms of the 19th century, past ink-stained fingers, half-dimmed lamps and piles of ribbon-bound letters. You hear the question whispered again and again. What if sleep doesn't come because the soul isn't silent? And more importantly, what if that's not wrong? The clock winds closer to midnight, or maybe it's already past it. At this point in the journey, time has grown soft at the edges, like paper soaked in tea. You glide now into the final years of the Victorian era, and just like your body preparing for sleep, the century itself seems to be exhaling, slowing, asking itself what it's learned from all this night watching and leaf brewing and whispered diary entries. One thing becomes increasingly clear. Victorians were obsessed with regulating sleep, but often failed to understand what they were trying to control. You settle in a grand townhouse now converted into a quiet boarding house, where the walls are thick and the routines are thin. Here, old habits linger but feel more like echoes than orders. A woman in her 50s sips a modest cup of tea and places a copy of the Queen magazine on her lap. She no longer bothers with blue spectacles or lettuce stews or iron tonics. She simply reads. Then she goes to bed. And when sleep doesn't come, she doesn't panic. She just waits. Because that's the other thing that begins to shift as the 20th century looms. A new relationship to insomnia. Less shame, less crisis, more curiosity. Of course, some in the late Victorian world still clung to the old ways. There were always those who saw sleeplessness as something to conquer, like a misbehaving child or an out-of-tune piano. A new wave of patent medicines appeared around this time, offering stronger and more dangerous ways to force the mind into rest. Chloral hydrate, sulfonal, later barbiturates. These weren't sleepy time teas. They were knockout drops with side effects that would rattle even the most hardened night owl. One ad from the 1890s simply says, "Drausina, for that restless feminine mind." Yikes. Historians still argue whether this pharmaceutical turn was driven more by genuine concern or by an increasingly impatient society. Sleep had become not just a comfort, but a requirement for beauty, for morality, for productivity. So when women couldn't achieve it naturally, there was profit to be made in manufacturing it. But just outside this chemical push, something softer was blooming. Writers, thinkers, and doctors began to publish tracts that questioned whether insomnia was always a problem. Not just for women, but for everyone. A man named Dr. George Beard popularised the idea of neurasthenia, a diagnosis that encompassed fatigue, anxiety, sleeplessness, and general mental fog, especially among the middle and upper classes. It was controversial, vague, and ripe for debate, but it did one crucial thing. It admitted that modern life could overwhelm the human mind. And not because people were weak, but because the world was loud. Electric lights were just beginning to spread. Train travel, once a luxury, was now routine. Factory towns glowed all night with gaslight and ironwork. Cities no longer slept the way they used to, and neither did people. One London woman wrote in her journal in 1897, "I cannot sleep, not because I am ill nor discontented, but because my thoughts spin faster than the night can hold them." It's one of the clearest windows we have into the growing realization that the human brain might not have evolved to keep pace with its own inventions. In response to this, a few medical thinkers tried something truly radical: listening to the patient. Instead of prescribing, they began asking questions. What do you feel before bed? What calms you? What worries you? And, perhaps most daring of all, what if you didn't need to sleep a full 8 hours every single night? This may seem obvious now, but at the time it bordered on heresy. Victorian society liked rules, and the 8 hours of sleep maxim had already started to take hold as the gold standard. Anything less was weakness. Anything more, laziness. But now, whispers of a new truth crept into public discourse. Maybe sleep patterns weren't universal. Maybe they were personal. Some doctors even began experimenting with segmented sleep, encouraging patients to lean into natural wakefulness if it came in the night rather than fighting it. The idea that you could rise at 2 a.m., read for a while or take a walk, then return to sleep peacefully was mind-blowing at the time, but to some it made perfect sense. You pass a woman in her modest flat who has done just that. She's built a little nighttime nook for herself, with a chair, a single lamp, a notebook, and a pot of weak tea. When she wakes in the night, she doesn't panic. She visits this little corner, breathes for a while, writes her thoughts, and waits for sleep to return. No cures, no panic, just acceptance. She calls it her between time. Thus, that idea of the between time is something that lingers in you now as you float through the final drawing rooms and bedrooms of the Victorian night. Because while the story began with panic and tonic bottles and whispery lettuce brews, it seems to be ending with something more profound, a reckoning, a recognition that perhaps sleeplessness wasn't always something to conquer, that it might be a message or even a gift. Not always, but sometimes you spot another woman, much younger, possibly newly married, reading a book of spiritual meditations by dim lamplight. She has the look of someone who was once frantic about sleep, but is now learning to soften around it. On the table beside her rests an empty glass with a lettuce leaf still clinging to the rim, like a relic of past attempts. She smiles at it and turns the page, and somewhere across the city, in a well-kept garden at the back of a modest estate, a nursemaid walks the stone path under a moon-dim sky. She suffers from night agitation, and her doctor recommended walking before bed. But she's found it does more than calm her. It reminds her that the world is still beautiful, even in its sleepless corners. The lavender has bloomed. The foxglove leans quietly. The stars don't judge. And as you glide past her, you feel something like understanding. That sleep for the Victorians was never just about rest. It was about value, about control, about survival. But also, sometimes, it was about hope. So maybe tonight, as you sit quietly on the edge of your own bed, you'll think of these women. The ones who boiled lettuce, yes. But also the ones who whispered into journals, walked in moonlight, or sat in silence with their thoughts and refused to be afraid. They didn't solve insomnia, but they gave it meaning, and that, in its own quiet way, is a kind of peace. You drift now toward the final hush of the century and the story, not with a crash, not even with a sigh, but with that subtle stillness that comes when something old exhales for the last time. Queen Victoria herself fades in 1901, and with her, the reign of an age that both confined and defined its women, especially when it came to rest. But the echoes don't vanish. Instead, they reverberate, softly, steadily, into the 20th century, shaping how we still think about sleep today. That's the strange legacy of those sleepless Victorian women. They didn't just lie awake. They asked why they were lying awake. And even if they didn't always find the answer, they left behind a paper trail of sighs and footnotes, lavender sprigs and scribbled margins for the rest of us to read. You pass a dusty shelf in a private collection, perhaps somewhere in Sussex, where one book catches your attention. It's a personal sleep diary from 1894, bound in brown velvet, its corners worn down from thumb-pressed worry. You open it slowly. Inside are lists, things that help, things that hurt, middle-of-the-night thoughts I'd rather not have, and then, toward the end, a line. If sleep will not come, then I must learn to welcome what comes instead. That might be the thesis of the whole thing, because as we close this long and winding story, what's left isn't a miracle cure or a perfect bedtime, it's a perspective, a truth, that sleep is more than a biological necessity. It's emotional, cultural, political even. And for Victorian women, sleep was also an arena of quiet rebellion. Let's go back for a moment, across this story you've journeyed through. You began in the tightly drawn bedrooms of high society, where sleeplessness was a problem to be hidden behind fine drapery and lace. You walked through kitchens with servants who couldn't afford to lose an hour of rest, yet often did, worried sick over wages, war, or someone else's baby crying. You brewed lettuce water and choked down vinegar tonics. You lay stiff beneath counterpane blankets, listening to mice in the rafters and the scrape of a husband's shaving bowl in the morning. You wore blue spectacles and dabbed rosewater on your temples. You hoped. You failed. You tried again. You paced through women's journals where sleep was whispered about like sin, unspoken but everywhere. You sat in consultation rooms where male doctors scrawled female hysteria in ornate cursive, then prescribed fresh air as if it could patch a soul. You watched women find each other in the quiet, scribbling notes on note cards, holding salons to talk about nervousness, daring to wonder whether their bodies were betraying them, or simply responding honestly to a life that never truly let them rest. You saw them reclaim the night. It's easy in hindsight to laugh at boiled lettuce leaves and blue spectacles, but they were doing the best they could with what they had. And sometimes that meant inventing rituals. Sometimes it meant turning a desperate moment into a habit that felt like hope. Historians still argue whether any of those Victorian remedies worked at all, whether lettuce water truly had sedative properties, or whether it was just the calming effect of doing something that mattered. But that debate misses the point. The real question isn't whether they cured insomnia, it's whether they helped someone cope with it. And more often than not, they did. You linger for a moment in a tiny back room of a modest home where a girl, no older than 14, is writing something in her spelling book. Not schoolwork, but a quote she's copied from her mother's journal. "The night is long, but I am longer still." And that's the inheritance, really. These women left us more than recipes and tinctures. They left us a blueprint for softness in the dark, for what to do when the world says rest but your mind won't let you, for how to live with that restlessness, not as failure, but as a fact of being alive. Sleep never did become easy for most of them, but over time it became less shameful, and in a world where silence was so often forced upon women, to simply speak the words "I can't sleep" became a kind of power. So now, as you reach the final passage of this Victorian tale, you're left with something oddly comforting. Not a solution, but a solidarity. The feeling that across oceans of time and layers of feather-filled quilts, someone else once stared at the same ceiling, wide-eyed and wondering, and said to herself, "Well then, I suppose I'll just wait for dawn." And in that waiting she made peace. So here you are now, tucked into your own bed, the faint hum of your fan spinning circles through the night air. Maybe your eyes are heavier now, maybe they're still open, but either way, it's okay. You've spent time with a chorus of women who came before you, who tossed and turned and brewed lettuce water, not because they believed it would save them, but because it gave them something gentle to do while the night passed quietly by. You might feel a little closer to them now. You might understand in that slow and quiet way that only comes in the stillness of night that not every problem needs to be solved. Some just need to be sat beside, breathed through, witnessed. The house around you settles, the street outside softens, even your thoughts begin to unravel at the edges like threadbare silk. Whatever keeps you up tonight, worries, ideas, aches, or just the random static of a too busy mind, know this: you're not alone in it. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're just awake in a world that sometimes asks too much and offers too little silence in return. But the silence is here now, and you've earned it. So breathe in gently. Let it out even slower. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to wait. You're allowed to drift. Sleep will come when it's ready. And until then, you have this quiet, and me whispering gently, reminding you, you've done enough. You are enough. Sweet dreams. End of story. Sweet dreams.